Welcome to Anime Audiobook channel. Naruto, Drop System. Chapter 31, Yagyu's Weakness and Returning to the Village. How is Kurane-sensei? Hinata Yagyu asked as he approached Hinata and Shino, who were standing near Kurane lying on the ground. While treating Kurane with a healing technique, Hinata replied, "She's fine, just knocked out by the electric shock." "Good to hear." Yagyu nodded, though he felt a bit somber. Seeing Kurane in this state served as a warning for Yagyu. Despite having developed the hard whirlpool water blade, which gave him the ability to defeat higher-level enemies, he realized that shinobi like himself, who excel in attack, are just as vulnerable to a well-placed blow. Aside from fourth Raikage, who specializes in both taijutsu and ninjutsu, most of the other Kage have physical constitutions similar to ordinary people. If struck by a well-aimed water spear, they would almost certainly die. However, the same applied to Yagyu. Most shinobi in the Naruto world, including Kurane, are high damage, low defense fighters, essentially fragile but powerful. Kurane was knocked out instantly by just one hit from a lightning jutsu. Yagyu realized that if he were hit by a similar attack, his fate would not be much different. Until he fully develops his sage body with its natural healing powers or awakens the Manjiki Sharingan, allowing him to use the ultimate defense of Susanoo, Yagyu knew his current weaknesses, defense and speed. If faced with an enemy possessing incredible defense or faster than him, Yagyu, despite his immense attack power, would find himself in a very vulnerable position. At this realization, Yagyu made up his mind to focus on improving these aspects of his abilities in the near future. "Yagyu-kun, Kurane-sensei has woken up." Hinata's excited voice brought Yagyu back to the moment. Looking over, Yagyu saw Kurane slowly opening her eyes, her vision still slightly hazy, as if waking from a deep sleep. "Kurane-sensei, are you all right?" Yagyu asked, his voice snapping Kurane back to reality. Seeing Yagyu standing over her and recognizing the familiar mountain path behind him, Kurane quickly stood up, looking around cautiously. "Yagyu, are you all okay?" Before Yagyu or the others could respond, Kurane, who had gotten up too quickly, suddenly felt a rush of dizziness. Her vision went dark, and she collapsed towards Yagyu. Barely shorter than Kurane, Yagyu quickly caught her and reassured her, "Don't worry, Kurane-sensei. Reiga Kurosuke is dead." What? Kurane, who had been deeply concerned, froze in shock. "Reiga Kurosuke is dead." Before Yagyu could confirm, Shino spoke up, "He was killed by Yagyu's new technique. His body is over there." Following Shino's pointing finger, Kurane saw the body of Reiga Kurosuke, one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. At that moment, Kurane's emotions became conflicted. On the one hand, she felt immense pride in her student, on the other hand, she felt ashamed of herself. As a teacher, she had failed to protect her students and had even needed them to save her. It was a humbling realization. At that moment, Kurane recognized her own weakness and regained a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She couldn't afford to drink her worries away and let herself stagnate anymore. If she didn't push herself harder, she really would become a joke among the Jainin instructors. Smiling, Kurane patted Yagyu's shoulder and said, "Yagyu, you did great." Although Yagyu didn't fully understand the sudden shift in Kurane's demeanor, he remained respectful and smiled back. "It's all thanks to the binding technique you taught me, Kurane-sensei. Without it, I wouldn't have found an opening to defeat Reiga." "I see." Both Kurane and Shino suddenly understood how Yagyu had managed to kill Reiga. Kurane realized how he had used the binding jutsu to create an opening, and Shino now understood why Reiga hadn't dodged and stood there, allowing Yagyu's attack to hit. Reiga Kurosuke was a missing nin from the Mist Village and one of the original 7 ninja swordsmen. He fled the village with the lightning swords, Kaiba, so his bounty in the black market is quite high. However, the reward is only given if the swords are handed over with him. Standing beside Reiga's corpse, Kurane looked around and soon spotted the lightning swords on the ground. After picking them up, she turned to Yagyu and asked, "Since you were the one who killed Reiga, his head and these swords are your spoils. Would you prefer the swords or the bounty?" "Kurane-sensei, I'd like to keep the swords," Yagyu answered without hesitation. Having already decided to work on his defense and speed, Yagyu knew the lightning swords could assist him greatly in achieving that. "All right, then the swords are yours." Kurane handed the lightning swords to Yagyu, adding, "Feel free to use them as you like. Once we return to the village, I'll inform Lord Hokage." With that, Kurane retrieved a storage scroll from her belongings, preparing to seal away Reiga's body. Reiga's brain was intact, making his corpse valuable to the Leaf Village, especially for the Yamanaka clan, who specialized in extracting information through mind techniques. By handing over Reiga's body, the village could prevent the Mist Village from using diplomatic channels to demand the return of the lightning swords. Just as Kurane was about to finish preparing the body, Yagyu suddenly realized something and his face changed. "Kurane-sensei, could I be the one to handle Reiga's body?" Yagyu asked urgently. Kurane paused briefly, then turned to Yagyu, noticing the serious look on his face. A few seconds later, she smiled, took out an explosive tag, and attached it to Reiga's body specifically, to his head. "Step back." As the tag began to burn, Team 8 quickly moved away. Boom! With a loud explosion, Reiga's body, along with the young boy who had been with him, was completely obliterated. After disposing of the bodies, Kurane dusted off her hands and smiled, "All right, let's head back to the village." Yagyu, still processing everything, asked, "Kurane-sensei, aren't you going to ask why?" "There's no need. Everyone has their own secrets that they don't want others to find out." Kurane smiled warmly and patted Yagyu's shoulder once more. "You don't have to worry about the lightning swords. As for Reiga's body, I'll explain to Lord Hokage that we used a strategy to destroy it completely." Yagyu felt a surge of warmth in his heart, deeply moved by Kurane's trust and understanding. "Thank you, Kurane-sensei." At the same time, Yagyu couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He had nearly revealed a critical secret. Seeing Kurane handling the body had reminded Yagyu of Kakuzu from the original story and the Yamanaka clan's mind-reading technique. This technique didn't require any tools and could extract thoughts and memories from a person's brain, even if they were already dead. Yagyu hadn't used the binding jutsu to paralyze Reiga, it had been the demonic illusion, shackling stakes technique from his Sharingan. Though Yagyu wasn't sure if Reiga's brain was protected by a seal from the Mist Village, he wasn't willing to risk it. If the Leaf Village's inner circle discovered he had the Sharingan, Yagyu could already envision the consequences. This incident taught Yagyu a valuable lesson: even the dead can't keep secrets. Corpses must be destroyed. With that, Yagyu took out a storage scroll and carefully gathered the remaining fragments of Reiga and the boys' bodies. Team 8 didn't ask questions or stop him, though it was clear they were curious. Yagyu's method of killing Reiga was clearly more complex than it appeared. Whether it was a secret technique or a bloodline limit, they weren't sure. Once Yagyu finished gathering the remains, Team 8 began their journey back to the village. Unlike their 5-day journey to the mission site, the team used the body flicker technique and returned to the village from the Land of Rivers in less than half a day, arriving just before dusk. "I'll go report the mission to Lord Hokage. You three can go home," Kurane said as they passed through the village gates. Take 3 days off to rest. Yes, Kurane-sensei, Yagyu, along with a visibly tired Hinata and Shino, nodded in response. With that, the team disbanded. Unlike usual, Yagyu didn't invite Hinata over for dinner. They had all been pushed to their limits, both physically and mentally. Yagyu only wanted to go home, take a bath, eat a simple meal, and sleep soundly. As he was heading to the market to buy some fresh ingredients, Yagyu suddenly brushed past someone. Pausing mid-step, Yagyu turned to look behind him, and his eyes flashed with recognition. It was an elderly man wearing a straw hat, carrying a wooden box on his back, and holding a bottle of liquor in one hand. Even though the world of manga and anime had now become reality, and this was Yagyu's first time seeing this person in real life, he immediately recognized the man. After all, this man was the first person Yagyu thought of whenever he reviewed the main plotline and important events. It was the bridge builder from the land of waves Tajuna. Chapter 32, The Origin of All Dojutsu, Leaving the Village Again. In the bathroom, steam filled the air. Yagyu stood under the shower, washing away the fatigue of the past few days. As he stood there with his head tilted back and eyes closed, his mind was replaying the main storyline. Tajuna was an important character in the Land of Waves arc and the client for Team 7's first C-rank mission. However, this mission was far from simple. The one who wanted Tajuna dead was Gat, one of the wealthiest men in the shinobi world. Gat's forces included not only many rogue samurai and missing nin, but he even hired Demon of the Mist Zabuza Mamakai, who was on the same level as Reiga Kurosuke. But Yagyu wasn't concerned with Gat or Zabuza. What really caught his interest was the boy who followed Zabuza Haku. Even though he couldn't remember the name of the boy with the red eye who had accompanied Reiga, Haku's name and presence were unforgettable to Yagyu. It was hard not to remember Haku, as his popularity had soared so high that many fans believed he was a woman before his gender was officially revealed. In certain forums and videos, people even considered him one of the most beautiful women in the Naruto world. In the early part of the series, many geniuses outshone even Naruto, the reincarnation of Ajura, and Sasuke Uchiha. Haku was one of them. Yagyu was particularly envious of two things: Haku's ice release Kekii Genkai and his ability to form hand seals with just one hand. Ice release was the combination of water and wind chakra nature transformations. If Yagyu could obtain this Kekii Genkai, he would not only gain wind chakra, but his mastery of wind nature transformation would rise significantly. Combining that with the chakra control he obtained from Sakura, Yagyu was confident that he could develop the fully realized wind style, Rasen Shuriken, even without Sage Mode. Not only that, but Yagyu was certain he could also develop the real hard Whirlpool Water Blade. As for forming hand seals with one hand, it was the perfect stealth technique until ninja could simply clap their hands and summon jutsu instantly. With these thoughts in mind, Yagyu made a decision he needed to involve himself in the Land of Waves arc and ensure he obtained these two abilities from Haku. After drying his hair, Yagyu summoned the virtual interface and fused the red light orb from his inventory. As the red light emerged from the inventory and merged into his body, the words Red Eye appeared next to Sharingan in the Kekii Genkai section of the virtual interface. Whoosh! Unlike when he had fused with Ajura's chakra or the Sharingan, Yagyu's eyes, now free of the cosmetic lenses, immediately began to glow with a vivid red light after fusing with the Red Eye Kekii Genkai. This red light made his already beautiful red eyes shimmer like glowing rubies, adding a hint of eerie charm. The world before Yagyu's eyes also transformed from a colorful view to one dominated by shades of red. His perspective shifted from first-person to a godlike third-person view, allowing him to see everything from all directions. His vision could even penetrate through objects, and his field of view expanded to cover at least a kilometer in all directions. After deactivating the X-ray and long-distance vision abilities, Yagyu increased the output of his yin chakra. In the air, red particles appeared out of thin air, and suddenly, an illusionary image of Hinata appeared in front of him. Though it was only a mirage, neither the Byakugan nor the Sharingan nor even advanced sensory abilities would be able to tell that this Hinata wasn't real. This illusion had chakra pathways and flowing chakra just like a living person, a detail unique to real individuals. I can't believe I haven't managed to get the Byakugan yet, but instead, I got this imitation, the red eye, Yagyu thought to himself, turning off the red eye. Yagyu didn't know the origin of the red eye, but its abilities were indeed similar to the Byakugan. The only difference was that the Byakugan saw the world in black and white, while the red eye saw everything in red. If it were in full color, it would be like the Tensagan version of the red eye. Additionally, the red eye had an illusionary ability that the Byakugan lacked. Not only could it create human illusions, but it could also create illusions of objects, making even advanced sensory abilities like the Byakugan unable to detect it. Its invisibility was more effective than even the transparent escape technique. After all, the transparent escape technique could only hide the user, while the red eye could hide multiple people at once. This illusionary power was why the red eye was considered the natural enemy of the Byakugan. At first glance, the red eye seemed superior to the Byakugan. But unfortunately, the Byakugan was the starting point for all ocular abilities. Whether it was the Sharingan, Rinnegan, Tensagan, or even the Jagan, all of these dojutsu originated from the evolution or mutation of the Byakugan. Yagyu even suspected that the red eye and the blood dragon eye might also be mutations of the Byakugan, but he had no proof. Being able to use the red eye immediately after fusing with it was good news for Yagyu. This would allow him to keep track of when Tajuna would leave the village. Lying in bed, Yagyu activated the red eye again, located Tajuna within the village, and then closed his eyes to rest. He slept soundly until 7 a.m. the next morning. After waking up, Yagyu immediately activated the red eye to find Tajuna's location. Seeing that Tajuna was still sleeping, Yagyu went about his morning routine, washing up and doing his early training in his yard. After finishing his training, he had his shadow clone make breakfast while he took a bath. By the time Yagyu finished breakfast, it was already 8:30 a.m. Tajuna had already woken up and was heading toward the Hokage's office, still holding the bottle of liquor he hadn't finished the night before. Coincidentally, just after Tajuna entered the Hokage's office, Yagyu saw Team 7 arriving at the office, with Sakura holding a small cat in her arms. Seeing this, Yagyu immediately understood the first arc of the main story was about to begin. He quickly went to the bathroom, put on his contact lenses, checked his inventory, grabbed a graffiti marker, and left his house. He scribbled out for training on the sign at his front door before heading into a secluded alley. Forming a hand seal, Yagyu activated the transformation jutsu. When Yagyu emerged from the alley, he had transformed into a plain-looking middle-aged man wearing simple clothes and a straw hat. Arriving at the village gate, Yagyu exchanged a glance with the two Chunin guards. In an instant, their expressions turned dazed, and they allowed Yagyu to pass. The Leaf Village, a military base in the Land of Fire, had the best sensory barrier in the shinobi world. The only way in or out was through the village gate. Entering the village wasn't difficult. Sometimes it required registration, and other times, it didn't. But leaving, whether for outsiders or villagers, required permission from the Hokage's office. Even for villagers, leaving required a valid reason and approval. That was why Yagyu had never left the village before. Going through the process to get permission wasn't an option for Yagyu, and it would leave a record. So, instead, he used the same method Itaki Uchiha had used to return to the village, hypnotizing the gate guards with genjutsu to let him pass. After leaving the village, Yagyu hid himself in a tree a few hundred meters from the gate, using the red eye to create an illusion to conceal his presence as he waited for Team 7 and Tajuna. Not long after, Team 7 and Tajuna emerged from the gate, heading toward the Land of Waves. Along the way, the three genin of Team 7 were eagerly observing the outside world, while Kakashi Hatake was reading his Ika novel without even looking at the road. Tajuna, on the other hand, kept taking small sips from his nearly empty bottle, trying to calm his nerves. He knew all too well the dangers that awaited him on the journey home. He was also painfully aware that he had lied about the rank of the mission. As a result, Tajuna was not only afraid of the enemies he would encounter, but he also feared that the ninja he hired would abandon him once they discovered the truth. If he were to die, the Land of Waves would be doomed. Chapter 33, Reliable Sakura, Yagyu watching the show. The Land of Waves is an island surrounded by the sea, a nation without ninja. Before the Naruto Bridge was built, the people of this country could only travel to the mainland by boat. That's why Tajuna wanted to construct a bridge connecting the Land of Waves to the ninja continent, hoping to revive the island's economy. The Land of Waves was located at the eastern edge of the Land of Fire, separated from the mainland by just one sea-spanning bridge. Unlike the mountainous terrain of the Land of Rivers, Team 7 only needed to pass through several forest paths to reach the coastline and then take a boat to the island, arriving at their destination. As Team 7 grew tired of the scenery, they began to chat along the way. During this time, Kakashi Hatake and Sakura took the opportunity to teach Naruto, who was largely illiterate, about basic knowledge. At least, they helped him understand the geopolitical situation of the ninja world, the one country, one village system, and the role and influence of the 5 Kage. Otherwise, the boy who kept shouting about becoming Hokage would continue to think the Hokage was just a village chief. Wearing a red kippao, with her pink hair flowing down to her waist and exuding a refined and classical demeanor, Sakura occasionally used her sensory skills to scan the surroundings just like Hinata. Kakashi's eyes showed a glimmer of satisfaction as he observed the calm and reliable Sakura. Although Sakura lacked offensive capabilities, her proficiency in sensory techniques and medical ninjutsu made up for the team's deficiencies. Additionally, it seemed she had feelings for someone, but she never showed favoritism within the team. She treated everyone equally and always helped whoever was in the right, often resolving Naruto and Sasuke's conflicts. This girl reminded him a lot of Rin, the girl he had killed with his own hands. The memory of Rin darkened Kakashi's expression once again. Yagyu, watching the vigilant Sakura, felt a surge of satisfaction as well. These were all results of his careful training. As someone who had transmigrated into this world and possessed knowledge beyond anyone else, Yagyu had always been extremely cautious from a young age. His cautious nature had influenced the 3 girls he grew up with, including Ino. During their training, Yagyu often helped them hone their sensory abilities. This instinct to constantly monitor their surroundings had become second nature for Ino, Hinata, and Sakura. Both Hinata and Sakura were now much more skilled than their original versions in the story. However, despite her caution, Sakura still hadn't detected Yagyu. Even Kakashi, an elite jonin, hadn't noticed the figure following them from 100 meters behind. To test the illusionary capabilities of his red eye, Yagyu had been periodically closing in on Team 7, trying to see if they would detect him. As the natural enemy of the 3 great dojutsu, the red eye did not disappoint Yagyu. Its illusions, undetectable even by long-range or X-ray vision, couldn't be sensed by ordinary methods. Still, remembering how his Sharingan had been able to spot the red powder of the red eye, Yagyu made sure not to get too close. If Kakashi lifted his headband and activated his own 3-Tomo Sharingan, he might spot the red powder as well. And so, Yagyu continued tailing Team 7 as they moved forward. The next morning, Team 7 was about to reach the eastern edge of the Land of Fire. After passing through one more forest path, they would reach the sea and, beyond that, the Land of Waves. At this moment, they noticed a large puddle of water on the path ahead. Seeing this, Yagyu tilted his head up to the blue sky, speechless. Even though they were near the coast, wasn't this an absurd setup? How far were the Land of Fire and the Land of Waves from each other? It hadn't rained for days, and yet they dared to place such an obvious puddle here. It was practically shouting, "Something's wrong here." At that moment, Yagyu realized the importance of education. Even a mid-level ninja could be outsmarted by a lower-level one if they lacked common sense. Sure enough. Apart from Naruto, both Sasuke and Sakura exchanged glances when they saw the puddle. Sakura made a discreet hand signal, and after seeing Sasuke nod in acknowledgement, she let out a quiet sigh of relief. But when she glanced at Naruto, who was still humming a tune, she was utterly exasperated. What's wrong with this guy? He had mastered a forbidden technique like the multi-shadow clone jutsu, his chakra reserves far surpassed hers, and his real strength was nowhere near dead last. So how could he have such poor perception? Thankfully, she had Sasuke, the only one in their class who could last against Yagyu in a sparring match. Otherwise, Sakura might have lost her mind. She couldn't help but imagine how happy and lucky Hinata must feel to be on the same team as Yagyu. Just like in the original story, as Team 7 passed by the puddle, two figures suddenly emerged from the water. Chains in hand, they wrapped them around Kakashi, who had somehow moved to the back of the group, tearing him apart. This scene left Naruto paralyzed with fear. Sakura gripped a kunai in one hand and a few smoke bombs in the other, standing protectively in front of Tajuna. Meanwhile, Sasuke dashed forward, quickly taking down the demon brothers with agile movements. Before Naruto even had time to process what had happened, Sasuke had already easily defeated the two. At the same time, Kakashi, who had seemingly been dismembered, reappeared before the group. After interrogating the demon brothers and delivering a few well-placed words that stung Naruto's pride, Kakashi's apology pushed Naruto to a breaking point. Determined, Naruto stabbed his own hand with a kunai, vowing to never be a coward again. It marked the start of his transformation from the dead last to a capable ninja. And with some emotional manipulation from Tajuna, Team 7 decided to complete the mission and escort him home. At the coast, Tajuna's companion had already been waiting for them. While Team 7 boarded the boat to head toward the Land of Waves, Yagyu walked across the water himself. That morning, the Land of Waves was shrouded in thick fog. For Tajuna, this was a good thing. It allowed them to avoid the patrols of rogue samurai and safely make it back to his home with Team 7. However, what Tajuna didn't know was that due to the demon brothers' failure to report, a powerful jonin was already waiting for them ahead. When a massive cleaver, spinning like a giant shuriken, flew overhead, narrowly missing Team 7 as they ducked just in time, a high-level jonin battle was about to begin. Unlike Reiga Kurosuke, who had to protect someone, Zabuza Momokai didn't have anyone to worry about. He could fight at full strength. In contrast, Kakashi was in the same situation as Reiga had been. He needed to protect Team 7 and Tajuna, which weakened his combat effectiveness. However, Yagyu wasn't particularly focused on the jonin battle. His red eyes, glowing so brightly that even his colored lenses couldn't hide them, were locked onto a particular direction. More precisely, they were focused on a tree, where a boy wearing an ANBU mask was perched. That boy was Yagyu's target for this mission, Haku. Now that he had found Haku, Yagyu didn't rush to make his move. It wasn't the right time yet. Instead, Yagyu watched as the two jonin clashed. Just like in the original story, Kakashi, who likely hadn't fought such an intense battle in a while, became distracted and fell victim to Zabuza's water prison jutsu, temporarily losing his ability to fight. Since Zabuza's real body was maintaining the water prison, he could only send a water clone to deal with Team 7 and Tajuna. But to his surprise, Sasuke and the newly determined Naruto, setting aside their usual bickering, showed incredible teamwork. They bypassed the water clone and attacked Zabuza directly, forcing him to retreat and release the water prison jutsu. Freed from the water prison, Kakashi fought at full strength, showing Zabuza the power of the renowned copy ninja of the Leaf Village. In the end, Zabuza was defeated by Kakashi's faster water style, giant vortex jutsu. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just as Kakashi was about to finish off Zabuza, the sound of projectiles cutting through the air rang out. Several senbon needles pierced Zabuza's neck. Disguised as a member of the Hidden Mists ANBU, Haku appeared before Team 7. After receiving Kakashi's permission, Haku took Zabuza's corpse away. Finally, now that the best opportunity had arrived, Yagyu immediately used body flicker to follow them. Chapter 34, Yagyu's Experiment. Just after Haku left, Kakashi Hatake collapsed from overusing his Sharingan. In Yagyu's past life, Kakashi was often joked about by fans as the unit of chakra because of his frequent exhaustion. However, in reality, Kakashi's chakra reserves were incredibly vast, similar to the sage body of the Uzumaki and Senju clans. At the age of 5, Kakashi could already use the multiple shadow clone jutsu. In the original story, without the burden of the Sharingan, Kakashi quickly developed the purple lightning technique, attaining the strength of a cage-level ninja. His immense chakra reserves even allowed him to use earth release techniques that encircled the entire Hidden Leaf Village. Thanks to this massive chakra pool, Kakashi was able to survive after having the Sharingan transplanted into him, despite its constant drain on his chakra. Haku didn't know that his enemy had already reached his limit. Even if he did, his kind-hearted nature wouldn't allow him to attack Team 7. After taking Zabuza away, Haku focused on moving as quickly as possible using the body flicker technique, intending to return and treat Zabuza's injuries. Suddenly, a large shadow loomed over him from behind. The sound of waves reached Haku's ears, and when he turned to look, his expression behind the mask changed dramatically. A massive wave, like the hand of a sea god, was crashing down toward him. Already in the middle of using the body flicker technique, Haku had no chance to dodge. He didn't even have time to wonder where the wave had come from or why he hadn't noticed the presence of someone using such a technique nearby. Acting purely on instinct, Haku quickly formed a one-handed seal, ice release, ice rock dome prison. Moisture in the air condensed rapidly, forming a massive ice wall in front of him. Haku held Zabuza protectively in his arms, taking cover behind the wall. The enormous wave crashed against the ice wall with tremendous force. Water release techniques are known for their destructive power, using both impact and weight. The wave slammed into the thick ice wall, smashing it to pieces and engulfing both Haku and Zabuza. Luckily, the ice wall absorbed much of the force, so as Haku was swept away by the water, he didn't feel any internal injuries, nor did Zabuza's condition worsen. As Haku allowed the wave to carry him, gathering chakra in his feet to prepare for escape once the water receded, a dense mist suddenly filled the air. Within seconds, the entire area became shrouded in fog. Recognizing the familiar hidden mist jutsu, Haku's expression shifted once again. Could it be that the Hidden Mist Village had sent someone to capture Zabuza? With this thought in mind, Haku swiftly began forming a seal, intending to use his ice release techniques to escape with Zabuza. However, before he could complete the hand sign, red powder filled his vision. In the next moment, Haku's movements stopped, as if he were bound to a tree, unable to move, and indeed, in Haku's vision, a large tree had appeared out of nowhere, with numerous vine-like tendrils wrapping around both him and Zabuza, tying them down. The next thing Haku saw was darkness as he lost consciousness. From beginning to end, he hadn't even glimpsed the face of his attacker. Is it dark now? After the mist dissipated, Yagyu looked at the unconscious Haku, whose body emitted no light, and muttered to himself. He wasn't too disappointed, as he had already mentally prepared for this possibility. Taking 2 chains from his space backpack, Yagyu bound Zabuza, who was still in a near-death state, and the unconscious Haku. Carrying them both on his shoulders, he used body flicker to move to a secluded area in the land of waves. After laying Zabuza and Haku on the ground, Yagyu put on a mask and summoned a shadow clone before beginning his experiment. Yagyu's clone removed the senbon from Zabuza's neck and used medical ninjutsu to heal him. Before long, Zabuza's eyelids twitched, and he slowly opened his eyes, muttering in his groggy state, "Took you long enough, Haku." Smack! Before Zabuza's vision could fully clear, a chop to the neck knocked him out again. Continue. Yagyu, showing no emotion as Zabuza failed to emit any light, commanded his clone. The shadow clone, possessing enough chakra to make Kakashi cry, continued using basic medical ninjutsu on Zabuza. Yagyu's father had been a combat-type ninja, specializing in water release, while his mother had been a support-type ninja, specializing in medical ninjutsu. The medical ninjutsu that both Hinata and Sakura knew had been taught to them by Yagyu himself. Perhaps due to his sage body and the Azura chakra within him, Yagyu's medical ninjutsu was extremely powerful, with effects surpassing even the A-rank mystical palm technique. Yagyu couldn't help but wonder if, after mastering the mystical palm technique, he'd be able to heal any injury, no matter how severe. Under the shadow clone's treatment, Zabuza soon regained consciousness. This time, as he opened his eyes, Zabuza finally saw Yagyu and noticed the bound Haku beside him. "You." Before Zabuza could widen his eyes and ask who Yagyu was, another chop to the neck knocked him out. Continue. Frowning slightly as Zabuza still showed no sign of emitting any light, Yagyu ordered his clone to keep going. Without a word, the shadow clone continued healing Zabuza. Smack! 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 Zabuza was knocked out repeatedly, again and again. This cycle repeated numerous times until, just as Yagyu was beginning to think his experiment had failed. Whoosh! After knocking Zabuza out once more, Yagyu finally saw what he had been waiting for. A white light flickered on Zabuza's body. Then, a beam of white light emerged from him, forming a floating orb beside him. Seeing this, Yagyu smiled in satisfaction. It turned out that any form of victory could trigger the drop mechanism. With that, Yagyu stopped tormenting Zabuza and turned his attention to Haku, ready to farm some items from him. Just like with Zabuza, Haku was knocked out repeatedly, healed, and then knocked out again. However, even as night fell and Zabuza naturally woke up multiple times only to be knocked out again, Yagyu couldn't get Haku to emit any light, not even the lowest tier white light. This situation was all too familiar to Yagyu. It was exactly the same as with Ino and Hinata. For years, Yagyu had never managed to get the Yamanaka clan's mind transfer jutsu from Ino or the Byakugan from Hinata. Even Suzuki, who frequently sparred with Yagyu during small exams and impromptu tests and was the only one in the class who could last a while against Yagyu, had only dropped one blue and one red orb. Yagyu had always thought that his inability to get valuable items from Ino and Hinata was due to bad luck. But now, after experimenting with Zabuza and Haku, and considering Sasuke's case, Yagyu realized that bad luck was only part of the problem. The real issue was that the drop rate had decreased. It was just like how strictly adhering to the rules during a taijutsu match could affect an invisible score, making it harder to obtain items. By trying to repeatedly knock out Haku in hopes of getting the red tier ice release or the likely blue tier one-handed seals, Yagyu had inadvertently lowered his score and the drop rate. Moreover, his strength was far greater than Haku's, so defeating the much weaker Haku wouldn't be scored as highly as defeating stronger opponents like Kurane or Zabuza. This was likely why Ino and Hinata hadn't dropped anything yet. The more Yagyu thought about it, the more convinced he became. So, he decided to stop farming items by repeatedly knocking Haku out and prepared to try a different approach. Chapter 35, The System's Exploit. Zabuza-sama. After an unknown period of time, Haku regained consciousness again. This time, since he wasn't immediately knocked out again, his first concern upon waking up was Zabuza's safety. Although it was dark, a bonfire was lit not far away. With the help of the firelight, Haku quickly spotted Zabuza, who was still bound nearby. Seeing that Zabuza-sama was still breathing, Haku, who had been panicking inside, finally breathed a sigh of relief. Awake! At that moment, Haku heard a voice. Looking in the direction of the voice, he saw a masked man approaching with a skewer of roasted meat. Haku didn't need to ask to know that this masked man was the one who had ambushed him, the supposed hidden mist Anbu. The repeated awakenings and knockouts from earlier were surely his doing as well. Seeing that the man hadn't beheaded Zabuza or sealed their bodies and minds to take them back to the hidden mist village, Haku realized that the man must have a purpose. So, Haku immediately spoke up, "Sir, may I make a deal with you?" "How convenient, I also want to make a deal with you." Yagyu sat down in front of Haku and asked, "What kind of deal do you want to make?" "I am a descendant of the Yuki clan and possess the ice release Kekii Genkai. I am only 15 years old," Haku said, trying to sell himself. "As long as you let Zabuza-sama go, I am willing to become your tool. You can do with me as you please. Even if it meant killing others." That last thought echoed in Haku's mind. If it meant saving his benefactor, he was willing to cast aside his kindness and become a heartless tool of slaughter, devoid of emotion. Such touching loyalty! I can see that he's become the only light in your life. Yagyu smiled and said, "But I'm not interested in tools that aren't loyal to me, so I refuse." Before Haku could raise the stakes, Yagyu continued, "I will let Zabuza go, but you have to help me with an experiment." "That's fine. As long as you release Zabuza-sama, you can do whatever you want with my body." "Any kind of experiment is okay," Haku quickly agreed, clearly misunderstanding Yagyu's intentions. "It's not that kind of experiment. Just cooperate, and you'll be fine." Yagyu unchained Haku and handed him the roasted meat, saying, "Eat this first, recover your strength, and then you'll be my test subject." "Yes." Haku didn't resist at all. After taking the meat, he removed his mask and started eating. When Haku finished the meal, Yagyu pulled out a ninja tool pouch from who knows where and tossed it in front of Haku before making a hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. With a poof, a shadow clone of Yagyu, brimming with immense chakra, appeared next to him. This clone was almost impossible to dispel unless it faced lethal or serious injuries. Seeing the shadow clone, Haku's eyes flashed with a sharp gleam, Although the shadow clone jutsu was well known throughout the ninja world due to its utility and ease of use, it was originally developed by the second Hokage. Yet despite this, many ninja from different villages still preferred using their village's specific clone techniques. For instance, Zabuza and Kisame favored water clones, while ninjas from the Hidden Stone preferred earth clones. Only Konoha's ninjas favored and frequently used shadow clones. Could it be that this Hidden Mist Anbu wasn't actually from the Hidden Mist village but was, in fact, a member of Konoha's Anbu? If so, why hadn't he killed them or taken them back to Konoha? Or perhaps he didn't belong to any of the 5 major villages. Curious about Yagyu's identity, Haku refrained from asking further questions, knowing that the masked man clearly didn't want his identity revealed. If Haku's curiosity got the better of him, Zabuza's life would surely be forfeit. So, Haku quietly strapped on the ninja tool pouch. Yagyu then handed him a notebook and a pen, pointing to the shadow clone beside him. "You will spar with my shadow clone. You can only use the weapons in that pouch, no Kekii Genkai or ninjutsu." Understood. Though confused, Haku did not question the order. Haku and the shadow clone moved to an open area near the bonfire, where they engaged in a free-form battle in the dim light. The fight was similar to the free-form spars that Yagyu had once engaged in with Sasuke Uchiha, relying purely on fundamental skills. The result, unsurprisingly, was that the shadow clone emerged victorious. This was because the shadow clone had been cheating, secretly activating its 3-tomo Sharingan. Using its superior visual acuity, it didn't miss a single opening and left numerous cuts on Haku before subduing him. Seeing this, Yagyu drew a horizontal line in his notebook and ordered the clone, "Heal him, and continue." After the shadow clone healed Haku, they resumed their unregulated battle. The outcome remained the same: the shadow clone won decisively. Time and again, Haku was defeated, only to be healed once more. Each time Haku lost, Yagyu would draw another line in his notebook, marking the tally of victories and defeats. After another defeat, Yagyu added another mark. The lines on the page had now formed 2 symbols, indicating that Haku had lost 10 times. Once the shadow clone finished healing Haku again, Yagyu didn't order them to continue but instead dismissed the clone, which still had a substantial amount of chakra left. He immediately summoned another shadow clone. This time, the new clone didn't possess overwhelming chakra but instead had reserves similar to Haku's. "Take this and continue," Yagyu said, tossing a small pouch to Haku. Haku caught it and saw that it contained military ration pills. Although still unsure of Yagyu's true purpose, Haku obediently took one of the pills and resumed his fight against the shadow clone. Even though this new shadow clone had chakra reserves similar to Haku's and lacked the endurance of the previous clone, it still managed to win the battle. Throughout the night, Haku suffered defeat after defeat, each time being healed by Yagyu's main body. Soon, Yagyu had filled his notebook with nearly 4 sets of marks. Just as Yagyu was about to declare the experiment a failure and step in himself, the shadow clone once again defeated Haku. Whoosh! This time, after being subdued, a blue glow suddenly emanated from Haku's body, shining brilliantly in the dark night. Seeing the light, Yagyu was filled with elation. It had worked. Not only could his shadow clone trigger the drop mechanism by defeating an opponent, but the loot would also be credited to Yagyu himself. As the blue orb of light was automatically absorbed into Yagyu's main body, rather than his shadow clone, Yagyu understood something crucial. He was the key but not the only key. As long as it was him, whether it was his main body or a shadow clone, victory belonged to him, and there was a chance of obtaining loot. Moreover, as Yagyu had previously suspected, the invisible scoring system was influenced not just by the manner of victory but also by the strength of the opponent. Defeating higher level or stronger opponents, no matter how trivial the victory, would increase the chances of a reward. For example, Kurene's verbal surrender or Zabuza being knocked out with a chop. However, defeating weaker or lower-ranked opponents lowered the drop rate. This explained why he hadn't been able to get anything from Ino, Hinata, or the numerous knockouts of Haku earlier. But now, Yagyu had found a loophole in the system: his shadow clones. Not only had he confirmed his theory, but Yagyu had also uncovered an exploit in the system. Chapter 36, Ice Release and One-Handed Seals acquired. To confirm if the loophole truly existed, Yagyu created another shadow clone. This time, the clone's chakra was only 2/3 of Haku's. Looking at Haku, who was eating a soldier pill, Yagyu said, "Continue fighting my shadow clone, but this time, you can use your Kekkei Genkai and Ninjutsu." Understood, Haku nodded obediently. Soon, the cool evening air grew even colder. Ice Release, Demonic Mirroring Ice Crystals. Haku started by using his Ice Release secret technique, creating a large number of ice mirrors and surrounding Yagyu's shadow clone. Water Style, Hidden Mist Jutsu. The shadow clone, with less chakra than Haku, conjured a thick mist, blocking Haku's line of sight. At the same time, the clone's eyes beneath the mask glowed with a bright red light. Red powder appeared within the mist. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of projectiles flying through the air echoed continuously in the mist. Haku, hidden within the ice mirrors, seemed to spot something in the mist and began throwing senbon needles, changing his position within the mirrors after each throw. Watching the battle with his red eyes from the outside, Yagyu's lips curled into a faint smile as he murmured, "I never thought that the illusions of the red eye combined with genjutsu would produce such an effect. It's like a combination of the Byakugan and illusionary techniques." From Yagyu's perspective, Haku kept throwing senbon into the ground, attacking different spots after changing positions. The ground was already littered with needles. Meanwhile, Yagyu's shadow clone stood still, performing the shadow clone jutsu, preparing a spiral water dragon. This was the view from Yagyu's and his clone's perspective. However, from Haku's perspective, after losing 20 times, he finally seemed to have the upper hand. He was now forcing Yagyu's clone to flee under a barrage of senbon, though the clone's speed made it hard to hit. Haku, not wanting to embarrass Yagyu and fearing that Zabuza might suffer the consequences, didn't go all out by occupying every ice mirror or launching an all-encompassing needle storm. Clearly, Haku hadn't realized that he was under the influence of an illusion. Genjutsu manipulates the target's 5 senses, allowing yin-release chakra to infiltrate the enemy's brain and control their nervous system, creating various illusions. There are many types of genjutsu, some rely on sight, others on sound, and some even on smell. However, the majority of genjutsu requires direct eye contact to be effective. And the hidden mist jutsu is one of the few techniques that counters such genjutsu. Haku could never have imagined that Yagyu's shadow clone was capable of casting a genjutsu within the mist. This was a stroke of brilliance on Yagyu's part. The red powder, created using yin-release chakra through the red eye, could also be used to cast illusions. Why not use this red powder as a medium for genjutsu? Haku's current state clearly proved it was possible. Water Style, Spiral Water Dragon. By now, Yagyu's clone had completed the Spiral Water Dragon technique and hurled it toward Haku, who had just changed positions. Crack, crack. The sound of shattering glass echoed as Haku and his surrounding ice mirrors were pulled into the water dragon by its immense suction force. Swept into the vortex, Haku's body spun helplessly, much like clothes in a washing machine. He couldn't move at all. The vortex's eye also gouged a trench into the ground, pulling in stones and soil, adding both physical and elemental damage to Haku. Boom! When the water dragon finally exploded, Haku's battered body dropped to the ground. His body was covered in wounds, and he had lost consciousness. If not for Yagyu's red eye, which could still see the chakra flow in Haku's meridians, one might have thought he was dead. Whoosh! As Haku hit the ground, his body began to glow with a brilliant red light. A red beam flew out, forming a floating orb on the ground nearby. Seeing this, Yagyu couldn't help but feel ecstatic. The game system indeed had a loophole. Although shadow clones are technically clones, the shadow clone jutsu is a B-rank technique, and the clone is formed from a portion of Yagyu's chakra. That portion of chakra, however, could conceal Yagyu's true strength, allowing the system to be deceived into awarding a higher victory score for what seemed like an underdog win, increasing the chances of rare item drops. The shadow clone jutsu truly was a god-tier technique. Tobirama Senju, you were truly a genius. As the red orb flew into Yagyu's main body, he had his shadow clone heal Haku while he opened his virtual interface to check the 3 orbs in his inventory. Inventory, Water Style, Water Prison Jutsu White. Inventory, One-Handed Seals Blue. Inventory, Kekii Genkai, Ice Release Red. The white orb dropped from Zabuza contained the water prison technique, which he had used to trap Kakashi. The blue and red orbs dropped from Haku were the ones Yagyu had been most eager to obtain: one-handed seals and ice release. Once these two were fused, Yagyu could use one-handed seals to catch opponents off guard, and he would also gain wind chakra as well as advanced proficiency in wind release. Without hesitation, Yagyu fused the orbs. As the 3 beams of light merged into his body, the ice release entry was added to the Kekii Genkai section of his virtual interface. At the same time, Yagyu felt a new, unique power emerge within him. Perhaps due to the growth of his sage body or the balance of his yin and yang release chakra, Yagyu instantly awakened both red eye and ice release after their fusion, much like how he had immediately mastered the Sharingan. Recalling Haku's hand signs and chakra flow during his use of ice release earlier, Yagyu slowly formed a one-handed seal. His chakra instantly surged in response, circulating through his meridians. Ice release. Yagyu muttered softly, "Ice rock dome of nothingness." Instantly, the moisture in the air condensed, forming 3 thick ice walls around Yagyu, protecting him. Looking at the ice walls that had formed out of thin air, Yagyu murmured, "So this is an elemental-based Kekii Genkai. It requires seals to manipulate chakra, along with both nature and shape transformation much more complex than the Sharingan or Red Eye. But as long as you have enough chakra and perfect control, you can create all sorts of ice constructs, inflicting both physical and magical damage on your enemies. I wonder if it's possible to lower the temperature even further. If I can develop this ability to lower the temperature more, the potential and growth of this Kekii Genkai would be enormous." With the development of his spiral water dragon and his personal creation of the hard whirlpool water blade, as well as combining the red ice powder with genjutsu, Yagyu had begun to take pride in developing his own techniques. He no longer sought to merely imitate others, he wanted to create his own jutsu. By then, Yagyu's shadow clone had finished healing Haku. After checking that Haku was no longer in danger, Yagyu dispelled the clone and left the area using the body flicker technique. True to his word, Yagyu did not go back on his promise to kill Zabuza and Haku. He held a certain admiration for Haku, who had such a kind nature. Both Haku and Kimimaro were exemplars of unwavering loyalty. If Yagyu had encountered them before Zabuza or Orochimaru, he would have gladly trained them to become his right-hand men. But alas, there were no what-ifs. For them, as loyal followers, they would only ever acknowledge one master in their lifetime. Yagyu had no interest in anyone else's dogs. Chapter 37, The Film Camera, and finally obtaining the Byakugan. After acquiring ice release and the ability for one-handed seals, Yagyu wasted no time and hurried back to Konoha. After all, Kurane had only given Team 8 3 days of rest. Just like when he left, Yagyu re-entered the village by using a genjutsu to hypnotize the gatekeepers, avoiding the registration process. The next day marked the third day of their break. For a rare occasion, Yagyu didn't wake up for his usual morning training. Instead, he gave himself a break. The past few days had worn him out a bit. Although both of his trips outside the village had yielded significant gains, the long walks, following people around, and camping outdoors had been tedious. Sometimes, even finding a place to bathe was a challenge. Plus, in this era, ninjas were jacks of all trades. They did everything from infiltrating enemy nations to gather intelligence or fighting battles, to simpler tasks like babysitting or cleaning up the village. No matter the world, making money was never easy. That day, Yagyu decided to relax. He didn't stay at home reading or studying chakra nature transformation or shape manipulation. Instead, he went out for a stroll. Since Sakura had not returned and Hinata couldn't leave the house easily, Yagyu didn't look for them. Instead, he made his way to Ino's flower shop and sneakily activated his red eye to peek inside, seeing if Ino was there helping out. When he saw she wasn't, Yagyu gave up on the idea of hanging out with her and continued wandering around the village streets. Yagyu, long time no see. Are you on a break today? Yagyu-kun, it's been a while. Are you alone? Want to go on a date with me? Yagyu-senpai, how's life as a genin? Have you gone on any missions outside the village? As he wandered around, Yagyu bumped into several classmates and underclassmen. They greeted him with enthusiasm. Yagyu didn't ignore them. He stopped, patiently chatting with them for a few moments. Some female classmates and underclassmen who had a crush on Yagyu even invited him out on dates, but Yagyu politely declined with a smile. Passing by a certain shop, Yagyu suddenly stopped, his attention caught by a sign outside. After reading the photo and text on the sign, Yagyu felt both surprised and delighted. A film camera, and it's this small. Intrigued, Yagyu entered the shop and struck up a conversation with the shop owner. Excuse me, do you still have stock of the camera advertised outside? Can I take a look? Of course. You've got great taste, young man. This camera has been flying off the shelves in the ninja world recently. Seeing Yagyu's forehead protector, the shop owner became very enthusiastic. After all, in this era, where technology hadn't fully taken off, ninjas were not only powerful but also among the highest earners. The owner quickly brought out a small, handheld film camera and handed it to Yagyu. A compact camera, hey! Examining the camera in his hand, Yagyu thought to himself. When taking photos for official records, photographers used large, standing cameras. Even when Team 8 took their group photo, the photographer used a large camera, so Yagyu assumed Konoha didn't have compact ones yet. Recalling the camera Sakura and others used at the end of Shippuden, Yagyu asked, by the way, do cameras that fit in the palm of your hand, with screens covering one side, exist in the ninja world yet? The shopkeeper blinked, confused. Would that still be considered a camera? Alright, so the technology hadn't advanced that far yet. Yagyu didn't press further and instead asked, how much for this camera? 98,888 ryo, the shopkeeper said, rubbing his hands together. That's a bit expensive. Can you lower the price? Yagyu frowned. For a C-rank mission, the reward is only between 30,000 to 100,000 ryo, and that has to be split between the village, the supervising Jainin, and teammates. On lower-end missions, Yagyu might not even make 10,000 ryo. He should have taken the opportunity to rob Gato instead of coming back empty-handed. Feeling a bit regretful, Yagyu negotiated, how about 88,888 ryo? It's a lucky number. Deal. Looking at the shopkeeper's delighted face, Yagyu couldn't shake the feeling he'd been tricked. But there was no going back. Haggling was never his strong suit, in either his past or present life. Yagyu reached into his pocket but actually accessed his space inventory, pulling out the money he had stored there. Knowing how many crises Konoha would face in the future, Yagyu never kept his valuable items at home. After purchasing the camera and some film, Yagyu left the shop, the owner's cheerful voice trailing behind him. As Yagyu strolled down the street, he couldn't help but admire the camera in his hands. With this, he could start capturing photos of Hinata and the others, documenting their growth over time. With that thought in mind, Yagyu quickly left the busy main street and headed into the wilderness to practice his photography skills. The next day, the break was over. Team 8 gathered at their usual spot, ready to begin another round of mundane D-rank missions. Having already completed a C-rank mission, none of them had any complaints about the tedious nature of D-rank tasks. Handling minor errands for the villagers might be tiring, but compared to the exhausting walking, constant vigilance, and difficulty finding decent rest while on escort missions, these jobs were nothing. Both Shino and Hinata had come to appreciate the value of these simple D-rank missions. Without the mental fortitude built from these missions, starting with a C-rank mission as a new genin could easily lead to problems. Seeing that her team had grasped the importance of D-rank tasks, Kurane smiled with satisfaction. Such exceptional students, there's no way they'd lose to Kakashi's team. If she recalled correctly, the time for this year's Chunin exams was approaching. When the time comes, she'd make sure to show everyone what her students were capable of. After the day's mission, Yagyu, as usual, invited Hinata to train with him. Having not seen Yagyu in several days, Hinata blushed and nodded. If she wasn't so shy, she might have nodded so vigorously that her head would bob like a little chick pecking at food. However, this time, instead of taking Hinata home right away, Yagyu brought her to an abandoned training field for a sparring match. Yagyu first overpowered Hinata using his main body, then created a shadow clone to continue sparring with her under the pretext of assessing her progress. Meanwhile, Yagyu took out his film camera from somewhere and began taking photos from a distance. It had to be said that there was a stark contrast between the shy Hinata and the confident, battle-ready version of her. In combat, she was much more composed and resolute, reminiscent of her alternate self from the infinite Tsukuyomi dream world. At first, the clone fought on par with Hinata, with both sides trading wins and losses. But as the clone adapted to her fighting style and began exploiting her weaknesses, Hinata started losing more often than winning. Over the next few days, Yagyu gradually reduced the chakra of his clones, first matching Hinata's level, then to 2/3, and eventually to only half. Whoosh! One day, after the clone defeated Hinata yet again, the long-awaited red glow Yagyu had been hoping for finally appeared around her. As the red orb automatically flew toward him, Yagyu didn't even need to check to know that inside was the Byakugan, the origin of all jutsu. Finally, he had it in his grasp. Chapter 38, The Upcoming Chunin Exam. In the space inventory, Kekkei Genkai, Byakugan Red. At Yagyu's house. After seeing off Hinata, who had helped him clean up after dinner, Yagyu summoned his virtual panel and checked the red orb in his space inventory. Seeing the Kekii Genkai he had been waiting for years to obtain, Yagyu felt a surge of joy. Although, after obtaining the red eye, the Byakugan no longer offered any immediate improvement for him. But as a transmigrator, Yagyu knew that this was only for the time being. As the starting point for all eye techniques, the Byakugan not only had many branches but also possessed significant potential for growth, provided the bloodline was pure enough. The Hyuga clan's Byakugan was considered weak because their bloodline wasn't pure enough. In contrast, the Otsutsuki clan on the moon had a much more advanced bloodline. Even if they couldn't awaken the Tenseigan, they could still combine multiple Byakugans to form a massive Tenseigan. With just the transplantation of a pair of highly pure Byakugan, Otsutsuki Tonari could awaken the Tenseigan within a few days. Hago Romo Otsutsuki's Byakugan mutated for the same reason because of his pure bloodline. In Boruto, Uzumaki Boruto was able to awaken one of his Jougan due to the upgrade of his bloodline. Similarly, as long as Yagyu upgrades his bloodline, the potential of his Byakugan would increase as well. Once he reached the level of the 6 paths, even if the Byakugan didn't evolve or mutate, it might still have the power to kill enemies with a glance or read people's minds like Kaguya Otsutsuki. Or perhaps, like Momoshiki Otsutsuki, he could see other people's fates. In short, while Yagyu might not need to use the Byakugan often, it was something he couldn't afford to be without. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Yagyu proceeded to fuse the Byakugan Kekii Genkai and observed his reflection. As the red light merged into his body, Yagyu could distinctly feel his brain secreting chakra, which all gathered in his eyes. Soon after, Yagyu's pupils underwent visible changes. Originally, Yagyu's pupils were red, with tiny irises in the center. But now, his pupils turned white, and the irises disappeared entirely. If not for the fact that his pupils were still surrounded by an iris, Yagyu would have thought his eyes were now entirely white. At the same time, he could feel that within these white pupils, there was energy similar to that of the Sharingan and Red Eye. Moreover, he instinctively knew how to activate this hidden energy. Yagyu formed the Ram seal with his hands and softly murmured, "Byakugan activate." In the next moment, the reflection of Yagyu in the mirror suddenly had bulging veins at his temples. If it were on an ordinary or unattractive person, this appearance might have seemed terrifyingly grotesque. But on the handsome Yagyu, these veins added a strange, captivating beauty, much like when Sasuke activated his cursed seal. With the Byakugan activated, Yagyu's perspective shifted just like when he activated the red eye. His view transformed from a first-person perspective to a bird's-eye view, capturing everything within a kilometer's radius. However, all the images and objects were in black and white, with only the chakra pathways in people's bodies and the flowing chakra inside them showing up in blue in Yagyu's vision. It was because of how visible the chakra pathways and chakra flow were that the Byakugan was such a counter to invisibility techniques and genjutsu. In this black and white world, the Byakugan user merely needed to locate that one trace of blue to identify the enemy's location. After getting a feel for the Byakugan's perspective, Yagyu deactivated it. The bulging veins receded, and Yagyu's white pupils gradually reverted to their original red. Seeing this, Yagyu was ecstatic. Unlike the Hyuga and Otsutsuki clans' Byakugan, Yagyu's Byakugan was like that of Himawari Uzumaki from Boruto. It only turned white when activated, and otherwise, it returned to its normal eye color. This way, Yagyu no longer needed to wear contact lenses all the time. However, the bulging veins were still too obvious, so until he could reveal all his cards, he would avoid using the Byakugan if possible. Leaving the bathroom, Yagyu took out the thunder swords, Kaiba from his space inventory and began his next phase of training. Yagyu wasn't particularly interested in swordsmanship. Just like how even if a ninja developed Kekkei Toda, unless their bloodline was connected to the Otsutsuki clan, they could only reach the peak level of a kage. Similarly, swordsmanship for a ninja had its limits at best, it could only elevate one to the level of a kage. But that wasn't the main point. The key was that once Yagyu awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan and could use the full-body Susanoo, he could easily slash mountains and split the earth with sword swings comparable to those of a top swordsman from the One Piece world. The massive size of the full-body Susanoo didn't require any technique, raw strength would be enough to overwhelm anything. Starting from scratch with swordsmanship would only be a waste of time for Yagyu. The reason Yagyu wanted the Thunder Swords, Kaiba, was that, like Asuma Sarutobi's chakra blades, they allowed the user's chakra to easily undergo lightning release transformation. By using these swords to train his lightning release, Yagyu could make twice the progress with half the effort. However, Yagyu wasn't refining his lightning release for offensive purposes, he was doing it to address his weaknesses. Yagyu's current shortcomings were his defense and speed. Until his sage body granted him the ability to heal without hand seals, he could compensate for these weaknesses using earth release for defense and lightning release for speed. In the original series, Kakuzu showcased the defensive capabilities of earth release techniques. Similarly, Sasuke Uchiha managed to match Rock Lee's years of training within just 1 month by using lightning release to stimulate his cells, drastically increasing his speed. Thanks to his success in developing several new jutsu, Yagyu had also come to understand both the advantages and limitations of Sakura's chakra control. The advantage was that this talent allowed Yagyu to perfectly control his chakra, enabling him to easily achieve various forms of shape manipulation. But this talent didn't help him improve his nature transformations. Because of this, while Yagyu could easily create chakra spirals and control water to form a spiral water dragon, he couldn't just form a water dragon in his hands directly. The same was true for the hard whirlpool water blade. Thus, Yagyu had to rely on external tools to assist him. Time flew by, and soon it was the end of June. During this time, Team 8 regularly gathered to complete missions, though they were all D rank. Kurane hadn't taken them on any more C-rank missions. It wasn't just Kurane, even Kakashi, Asuma, and the other Jonin instructors from previous years had stopped taking their teams on missions outside the village. Because they all knew that late June to early July was a very special time. Screech! One day, while Team 8 was helping clean up the village as usual, the sharp cry of an eagle suddenly pierced the sky. The cry was so loud that it seemed to reverberate through all of Konoha. Upon hearing the sound, the Jonin in the village stopped whatever they were doing and immediately vanished, leaving after images as they dashed toward the Hokage's office. Kurane turned to Yagyu and the others, saying, "Finish the task, then you're dismissed for the day. We'll meet at the usual place tomorrow." With that, she disappeared in a flash. As Yagyu looked at the eagle circling above the village, he had a thoughtful expression. At this time of year, if there were no surprises, it was likely the Chunin exams were approaching. Chapter 39, A Bold Idea, Life is a Gamble. The next day, at 9 a.m. Yagyu and his teammates gathered early at their usual spot. Kurane arrived shortly after, using her body flicker technique to appear before them. Normally, as soon as Kurane arrived, she would immediately take Yagyu and his teammates to pick up a mission. However, this time was different. She was holding 3 forms in her hand. Handing the forms to Yagyu, Shino, and Hinata, Kurane said, "Yesterday, the Hokage summoned all the Jonin instructors to announce that the Chunin exams will be held on July 1st. I've already registered you for it. These are the application forms. You three can discuss it. If you decide to participate in this year's Chunin exams, fill out the application forms and submit them to the administration building by noon on July 1st. If you choose not to participate in this year's Chunin exams, you can simply ignore the form. Each Chunin exam isn't just an opportunity for Genin to be promoted, it's also a chance for Konoha to display its national strength. If you participate, your opponents will not only be from this village, but also Genin from other villages. And when fighting against Genin from other villages, there's always the risk of casualties. I won't be able to help you during the exams, so you must consider carefully. That's all for now. You're dismissed, and I'm giving you some time off for the next few days. After saying that, Kurane disappeared with her body flicker technique. Throughout the entire exchange, Kurane hadn't mentioned that if even one of them chose not to participate, Team 8 would be disqualified from the Chunin exams. Clearly, she was testing their team cohesion, seeing whether the bonds they had built over the past few months were strong enough. Shino looked at the application form in his hand and asked, "Yagyu, what do you think?" "Of course, I'm going to participate," Yagyu said with a smile. "This is one of the rare opportunities to compete against Genin from other villages and see how we measure up against them." Hearing this, Shino's lips curled into a faint smile. "If you're participating, then so am I." "Me too," Hinata chimed in. "Since that's settled, let's use the next few days to train. We'll meet here at 11 a.m. on July 1st, Yagyu said, waving his application form as he parted ways with Shino and Hinata. He didn't invite Hinata to his home, and she didn't feel disappointed either. After deciding to take part in the Chunin exams, both Hinata and Shino felt a sense of pressure but also newfound motivation. Hinata resolved to ask her father for guidance so she wouldn't be a burden to Yagyu. Shino had similar thoughts. Having witnessed Yagyu's strength and knowing he had a hidden trump card, Shino felt both reassured and pressured. His teammate was so strong that, even if he couldn't catch up, he didn't want to hold Yagyu back. Thus, Shino decided to ask his father for extra training when he returned home. This was one of the perks of coming from a ninja clan. After parting with his teammates, Yagyu didn't return home immediately but instead went to a waterfall at the edge of a cliff. Shadow Clone Technique. Yagyu formed hand seals and created 5 shadow clones. The clones divided the workload and began their respective training. Boom boom boom. Sizzle sizzle. The sound of explosions, like detonating explosive tags, and the crackling of electricity echoed continuously. But with the roar of the waterfall nearby, the sounds were drowned out by the water's flow. Unless someone happened to pass by, no one would notice Yagyu and his 5 shadow clones. One of the shadow clones periodically activated the red eye, using it for both clairvoyance and remote viewing. If anyone approached or spied on the area, Yagyu would know in advance. With his shadow clone monitoring from above and the current situation being special, Yagyu no longer needed to be as cautious. A few hours later, Yagyu finally felt fatigued. Wiping his damp hair and body with a towel he retrieved from his space inventory, he changed into dry clothes. Afterward, he dispelled his shadow clones, causing his fatigue to deepen. Instead of heading home, Yagyu lay on the grass to rest before continuing his training. In his hands appeared a diary out of thin air. Opening the diary, it was filled with Chinese characters. The text contained Yagyu's notes on the main storyline and key events he had compiled over the years. Lying on the grass, Yagyu held the diary above his head and carefully flipped through it. Even if Hiruzen Sarutobi used his crystal ball jutsu to spy on him, all he would see was Yagyu lying down and reading. As Yagyu reviewed the notes, recalling the plot of the Chunin exams, certain important events and characters came to mind. At the same time, a bold idea that had been recurring in Yagyu's mind recently surfaced once again. The Chunin exams were just the subtitle of this arc. The real theme was the Konoha crush. It was also the second major disaster to befall Konoha after the Nine Tails attack. The main characters of this arc were Hiruzen Sarutobi and Naruto, and their respective opponents were Orochimaru and Gaara. Everyone else was just supporting characters. Even if Yagyu gave it his all, the best he could hope for would be to play a supporting role, like Kakashi Hatake or Might Guy. If he did nothing, he would be no more than a side character, like Shikamaru Nara, running to support Sasuke alongside Naruto. If Yagyu hadn't encountered Reiga Kurosuke, hadn't obtained the Red Eye and Ice release, and hadn't discovered the system loophole, he would have definitely chosen to play it safe and remain a side character. As long as Hiruzen Sarutobi died, Konoha would soon enter the era of Tsunade. Unlike Hiruzen, Tsunade wouldn't be full of suspicion. If Yagyu performed well, she would only appreciate and value him as the fifth Hokage. Becoming one of Tsunade's subordinates meant Yagyu wouldn't have to worry about Danzo targeting him. Tsunade's heritage was incredibly strong, and as a renowned medical ninja, she was a lifesaver for many from her generation and even younger generations. She was a revered figure, an idol among female ninja across the entire ninja world. If she became the fifth Hokage, both ninja clans and civilian ninjas alike would support her. In Tsunade's era, Danzo wouldn't dare act as recklessly as he had under Hiruzen. Hiruzen had shielded Danzo out of a sense of camaraderie and belief that Konoha needed the root. Tsunade, however, would not hesitate to take action against him. So at first, Yagyu believed that the Chunin exams were just a transitional arc for him. Only after this arc would his real stage appear. But now, Yagyu had an incredibly bold, even insane idea. Moreover, this idea had gradually formed into a viable plan. Once implemented, Yagyu would soar to new heights, unstoppable. At that thought, Yagyu's breath caught momentarily. Beneath the diary, a determined gleam flickered in his red eyes as he murmured, "Fortune favors the bold. Life itself is a gamble." With that, Yagyu abandoned his plans for further training and headed home to perfect his scheme. Chapter 40, Contrast Beauty and the Two Gatekeepers. Over the next few days, Yagyu stayed indoors, not leaving his house. Even when he needed groceries, he had his shadow clones handle it. He spent all his time inside, doing who knows what. Meanwhile, many new faces appeared in the center of Konoha. These were genin from other countries who had come specifically to participate in Konoha's upcoming Chunin exams. After arriving, they wasted no time and used various methods to gather information on Konoha's genin from recent years. As the top student of Konoha's 60th class, Yagyu naturally became one of their targets. Whether it was his real body at home or his shadow clones out buying groceries, Yagyu noticed numerous prying eyes. However, seeing that none of them had the audacity to infiltrate his home, Yagyu chose to ignore them. During this time, Ino, Sakura, and Hinata also didn't seek out Yagyu, as they were all busy preparing for the Chunin exams. Sakura had it easier, but Ino and Hinata, as heirs of their respective ninja clans, were undergoing intense training in their family's secret techniques. As future clan leaders, being eliminated too early would be a great embarrassment. This was a matter of family honor. Ino was in a slightly better situation, as her father, Inoichi, wasn't too strict. However, for Hinata, as the heir of Konoha's last great noble clan, these days were definitely challenging for her. July 1, 10:50 a.m. After being a shut-in for a few days, Yagyu finally stepped out of his house. As he made his way to the usual meeting spot for Team 8, Yagyu spotted Hinata from a distance, who had already arrived. Hinata had her hands in the pockets of her white coat, her small face looking serious as if she were on high alert, scanning her surroundings. Click! Instead of immediately greeting Hinata, Yagyu reached into his black coat, accessing his spatial inventory, and pulled out his film camera. He captured the current version of Hinata's cool and focused appearance. Hearing the sound of the camera, Hinata's sharp gaze instantly turned toward him. But the moment she saw that it was Yagyu, her imposing demeanor softened visibly. Her cheeks flushed, and almost instinctively, she lowered her head. Her hands slipped out of her coat pockets, and she began fidgeting with her fingers in front of her chest, which had grown quite prominent and stood out among her peers. Click, click, click. Instead of stopping, Yagyu kept pressing the shutter, capturing the entire transition of her mood. If it weren't for time constraints, he would have loved to rush home and develop the photos immediately. After finishing, Yagyu put the camera away, walked over to Hinata, and gave her a thumbs up, saying, "Hinata, you looked really cool just now. Your aura was completely different from usual. Looks like you've grown a lot in these past few days." "Yagyu-kun, you're exaggerating," Hinata mumbled softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she kept her head down. But inside, she felt as sweet as if she had eaten honey. "Be more confident. Don't keep your head down all the time," Yagyu said, patting her shoulder with a smile. "I like the way you looked just a moment ago even more." Hinata responded quietly and lifted her head, though her eyes still didn't dare meet Yagyu's, darting around shyly as the blush on her cheeks deepened. Even more adorable was that Hinata didn't seem to realize her hands were still nervously tapping her fingers together, the rapid motion betraying her anxiety. If Yagyu didn't know that Hinata's threshold had already been pushed to the limit, he might have taken out his camera again to capture this cute scene. The slightly romantic atmosphere was quickly broken. "Sorry, I'm late," Shino's voice cut through, startling both Yagyu and Hinata. Looking at Shino, who had appeared beside them without a sound, standing with his hands in his pockets and striking a cool pose, Yagyu asked, "Shino, when did you get here?" "I arrived while you were secretly taking pictures of Hinata." "I didn't want to disturb you too," Shino said indifferently. At that moment, Hinata's already blushing face turned bright red, and steam seemed to rise from her head. Cough, cough. Seeing that Hinata was on the verge of fainting from embarrassment, Yagyu quickly cleared his throat and changed the subject. "Now that we're all here, let's head to the academy. Did you both bring your completed application forms?" "We're ready," Shino said. "Me too," Hinata added. With a grin, Yagyu said, "Then let's go meet our seniors and the genin from other villages." And so, Team 8 set off for the Ninja Academy. Along the way, they encountered many other genin from different villages. These genin glared at them, trying to intimidate Team 8 with hostile stares. However, with just a brief glance, Yagyu's gaze left these hostile genin in a daze. A few moments later, they snapped back to reality, drenched in cold sweat. What? Was that a genjutsu? Who is that guy? Remember his face? If we see him during the exam, we run. Unaware of their reactions, Yagyu merely wanted to give them a little warning, reminding them whose territory they were in. Coming to an enemy village and acting so arrogantly as if they were from the major ninja villages was unwise. Upon arriving at the academy, Team 8 followed Kurene's instructions and headed to the administration building to submit their application forms. As they reached the staircase, they saw a sign indicating that the submission desk was on the third floor. However, as soon as they reached the second floor, Yagyu and his teammates felt something was off. Exchanging a glance, all three quickly used their index and middle fingers to disrupt the chakra flow in their bodies, dispelling the yin chakra that had just invaded them. Looking around the second floor, they saw many genin wandering around, seemingly searching for the submission desk. Yagyu and his teammates, all trained under a genjutsu expert, immediately recognized that these genin had fallen under an illusion, tricked into believing the second floor was the third. At the staircase leading to the real third floor, two chunin in green vests stood watching the scene with amusement. These two chunin were none other than Konoha's two famous gatekeepers Katetsu Hagane and Izumo Kamizuki. Without paying any mind to the crowd, Yagyu and his team made their way toward the staircase guarded by the two chunin. Seeing the three approaching, Katetsu and Izumo were initially surprised, but upon noticing Hinata's eyes, they nodded in understanding. So that's how they broke through our demonic illusion, false surroundings technique, they thought. However, they weren't about to let them through so easily. Just as Katetsu and Izumo exchanged a glance, smiling in mutual understanding, and prepared to give these juniors a little test. The moment they turned their gaze toward Yagyu, their expressions suddenly became dazed, just like the genin from earlier. By the time they snapped out of it, Yagyu and his teammates had already disappeared. Katetsu, did you notice anything? Izumo asked. Katetsu shook his head. No. You. I didn't either. Izumo's eyes widened in shock. There was no sound, so it wasn't a sound-based genjutsu. No scent either, so it wasn't smell-based. And, he didn't even make any hand seals. Katetsu chuckled. He doesn't seem to have any of the typical clan traits, but he still managed to put us under a genjutsu with just a glance. This year's Chunin exams are going to be interesting. Haha, and he's one of our own Konoha genin. If his genjutsu is this strong at such a young age, he might become a genjutsu specialist in the future. Izumo grinned. I can't wait to see if there are any other impressive geniuses among the genin this year. Chapter 41, Shocking the Audience, Konoha's Four Flowers. Upon reaching the registration area on the third floor, Team 8 handed over their application forms to the officials and received the location and seat numbers for their exam room. After leaving the administration building, Yagyu and his team headed to the academy building. Throughout the journey, Yagyu noticed that neither Team 7 nor Team 10, and not even Team Guy, were anywhere to be seen. He wasn't sure if they had arrived early or were running late. At the entrance of the exam room, Yagyu, Hinata, and Shino spotted a familiar figure, Kurane. Standing beside her were Asuma Sarutobi and Kakashi Hatake. Sensei, Yagyu and his teammates greeted Kurane as they approached her. Seeing the three of them arrive together, Kurane stood up with a smile of satisfaction. I'm so happy to see the three of you here together. She then added, there's actually a rule in the Chunin exams, unless there's been a casualty, all team members must register together in order to participate. Seeing all of you sign up shows that you're unwilling to abandon your comrades. I can already see the bond you've formed. No matter how you do in this exam, I'll be assigning you to more advanced missions afterward. Kurane then patted Yagyu's shoulder and introduced the two other Jonin standing beside her. These two are my classmates and elite Jonin of Konoha. You've already met the one with the beard, Asuma Sarutobi, but you can also call him Asuma-sensei. And this masked man here is Kakashi Hatake, Konoha's copy ninja and the leader of Team 7. You can call him Kakashi-sensei. Asuma-sensei, Kakashi-sensei, Yagyu and his teammates politely greeted the two Jonin. Nice to meet you, Asuma said with a smile. Ino's mentioned you all a lot. She seems to really miss you guys. Maybe our teams can meet up more often. He glanced at Kurane as he said the last part, his interest in her still very obvious. Upon hearing Ino's name, both Yagyu and Hinata smiled slightly, already imagining what Ino's expression would have been while talking about them. Kakashi put down his copy of Ika Ika Paradise and curiously eyed Yagyu, who stood a head taller than both Hinata and Shino, and nearly as tall as Kurane herself. So this is the top student. His presence is certainly something our second best can't compare to, Kakashi said with interest. But be careful, our number 2 has made a lot of progress recently. In response, Kurane confidently remarked, even if your Uchiha has awakened his Sharingan, he's no match for Yagyu. Just wait, Kakashi, Asuma, my students are going to blow you away. Oh, Kakashi and Asuma exchanged surprised glances. Is she that confident? Does this top student have some hidden trump card? Sensei, we'll head inside now, Yagyu said as he noticed Kurane's proud smile. All right, go on and good luck in the exam, Kurane replied with a smile and a nod. After nodding politely to Kakashi and Asuma, Yagyu led Hinata and Shino into the exam room. The moment they entered, the atmosphere changed dramatically. First, the noisy chatter hit their ears like a marketplace, and then countless hostile or murderous glares surged toward them like a wave. Hinata and Shino instinctively tensed up, their bodies reacting to the danger. Such rude people, Yagyu muttered with a slight frown. He scanned the room, his Sharingan hidden behind cosmetic contact lenses beginning to spin subtly. The next moment, those glaring at Yagyu froze, their expressions turning from hostile to terrified. Thud, thud, thud. One after another, the genin in the room paled as if they had just seen something terrifying. Some of the tougher-looking ones, who were actually weak-willed, collapsed to the floor in fear. Others even screamed out in terror, "No! Don't kill me!" Chaos erupted in the exam room. But soon, the commotion began to settle. I'm not dead, I'm alive!" shouted one of the genin who had broken free from the genjutsu, elated by his survival. Some were so overwhelmed with joy that they even started to cry, oblivious to how embarrassing their reactions looked to those around them. Once they realized how foolish they appeared in front of everyone, the embarrassed genin fell silent, wishing they could dig a hole to hide in. Yet, no one laughed at them. Instead, everyone around them stared at Yagyu with caution. Those lucky enough to have avoided falling under his genjutsu swallowed nervously, their faces filled with fear. A group genjutsu, who is that guy? I saw my own death. My teacher once showed me a similar technique, a B-rank genjutsu called Hell Viewing Technique. But this guy didn't even need to use hand signs to cast it in on so many of us at once. I know him. He's the top student from Konoha this year. Even the last Uchiha in his class couldn't beat him. If we run into him in the next stage, we should retreat immediately. Under the weight of Yagyu's presence, the exam room fell eerily quiet, with only faint whispers breaking the silence. Squeak! At that moment, the door to the exam room opened again. A familiar voice called out to Yagyu and Hinata, "Yagyu, Hinata, long time no see." Before Yagyu could even turn around, something heavy hit his back, causing him to lean forward slightly. Two arms wrapped around his neck from behind as someone clung to him. There was only one person bold enough to act like this. "Long time no see, Ino," Yagyu said with practiced ease as he gently pried her arms off and set her down. Looking her over her long blonde hair tied in a high ponytail with bangs covering one eye, Yagyu raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Have you gotten taller, Ino?" "Hee, you noticed?" Ino smiled mischievously, doing a playful pose. "I've grown 3 centimeters over the past few months." She then tried to compare her height with Hinata, the tallest of the 3 girls, but the next moment, Ino's mouth dropped open, and she froze in place, her face turning pale as if she had turned to stone. Her eyes were locked on Hinata's chest. "Yagyu, long time no see." A cheerful voice called out from behind him once again. Yagyu turned to see a girl with pink hair, wearing a red kipao, running over to him. It was Sakura. Behind her were Naruto and Sasuke. "Long time no see, Sakura," Yagyu greeted, raising his hand. Unlike Ino, Sakura was more reserved and didn't act so boldly. Seeing Yagyu wave back at her, her smile brightened even more, and she turned to greet her friends, "Ino, Hinata, long ti." Her words cut off abruptly, her eyes widening in shock as she stared at Hinata's chest. What in the world, just 3 months ago, it hadn't been nearly this exaggerated. Sakura glanced down at her own flat chest, where she could still clearly see her feet, and not feeling the slightest bit of weight. She, too, turned to stone, cracks forming as her heart shattered. "That sound, was my heart breaking." "Ino, Hinata, can I have a word with you?" Ino, snapping out of her daze, quickly dragged the now flustered Hinata aside for a private conversation. Sakura hurriedly joined in as well. As the 3 girls exchanged whispers, Yagyu glanced around the exam room and quickly spotted another familiar face, a girl with her hair tied up in 2 buns, who was quietly observing them from a distance. Finally, the 4 flowers of Konoha were gathered in one place. Chapter 42, Seitenjo and Panda Eyes. Long time no see, Yagyu. As Ino, Hinata, and Sakura went off to chat, Shikamaru Nara, walking in with his hands behind his head, greeted Yagyu. Taking a glance at the other examinees around, who looked wary and fearful, with some even having tear-streaked faces, Shikamaru quickly understood what had happened. "Looks like you gave them quite the scare." "Long time no see, Shikamaru, Koji," Yagyu smiled. "I was just reminding them whose home turf this is." After that, Yagyu greeted Naruto and Sasuke, who had approached as well. "Long time no see, Naruto, Sasuke." Seeing that Yagyu hadn't forgotten about him, Naruto's face lit up with joy, but just as he was about to raise his hand to respond, Sasuke suddenly stepped forward, standing before Yagyu and looking up at him. Although Yagyu was a good deal taller, Sasuke still wore a proud and defiant expression. "I'm glad you showed up for the Chunin exams. This time, I'll show you the true power of the Uchiha clan." "You seem to have awakened the Uchiha clan's Kekii Genkai," Yagyu remarked with a gentle smile. "I'm curious to see the power of the Sharingan as well. I hope we face each other in the exams." "You will," Sasuke said confidently. At that moment, Sasuke seemed to revert to how he had been back in the 5th grade. Ever since losing to Yagyu in their no-holds-barred sparring match back then, Sasuke, the once proud genius, had stayed silent for a whole year. At that time, he had given up hope of beating the monstrous Yagyu in any fundamental skill. But now, Sasuke no longer saw Yagyu as unbeatable. Since awakening his Sharingan, with both eyes developing into the Two-Tomo Sharingan, Sasuke had come to realize the vast gap between those with Kekii Genkai and those without. To Sasuke, Yagyu was just a commoner. If he was still relying on the same old tricks, then he no longer deserved to be considered a worthy rival. Still, Sasuke was eager to fight Yagyu again, to regain the dignity he felt he had lost over the years. Unaware of Sasuke's thoughts, Yagyu might have chuckled had he known and thought of the phrase Seitenjo, implying the clear skies had returned, and Sasuke felt he was once again in control. Yagyu didn't dampen Sasuke's confidence. A little confidence is good, Yagyu thought. He'll keep challenging me, which will only increase the chances of unlocking Indra's chakra. Let's not disturb others any longer. Let's find our seats, Yagyu said, turning to his teammates. At his words, Ino, Hinata, and Sakura quickly returned from their conversation. With that, the three squads set off to find their seats. Thanks to Yagyu's earlier intimidation, their gathering didn't provoke any anger, and Kabuto Yakushi found no excuse to join in and show off his acting skills. Along the way, any examinee Yagyu glanced at quickly lowered their heads, not daring to meet his gaze. Only a few, who had avoided falling victim to his genjutsu earlier and were confident in their abilities, met Yagyu's eyes with bold determination. Before long, Yagyu found his assigned seat. But when he saw who his seatmate was, a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. Just as he sat down, a voice filled with restrained excitement reached his ears. "What's your name?" Turning to the boy beside him, who carried a large gourd on his back and had dark circles under his eyes, Yagyu smiled and answered knowingly, "My name is Yagyu. And you?" "My name is Gaara." Gaara's expression was emotionless, but the excited, bloodthirsty tone of his voice made it seem as though he were wearing a menacing grin. "You're strong, a worthy opponent to kill. I can smell a strong scent of sand coming from you. Your face and body are protected by a sand armor, aren't they?" Yagyu teased with a slightly mocking tone. "As expected of a shinobi from the land of wind, you certainly know how to play with sand." Gaara's expression didn't change, but internally, he was a little shocked and even more excited. This guy had instantly seen through his sand armor. He was definitely different from the others. If he could spill this guy's blood, Mother would be very happy. At that thought, the sand and the sinister aura surrounding Gaara began to stir, causing his siblings, Temari and Kankuro, who had been keeping a close eye on him, to look alarmed, ready to rush over and calm him down. Just then, Yagyu said casually, "If you attack now, you'll be disqualified from the exam." Gaara's aggressive energy momentarily faltered before slowly subsiding. "I'll kill you in the next round," Gaara said flatly. "You won't be able to," Yagyu shook his head with a smile. "My abilities just so happen to counter yours. Unless you're far stronger than me." Gaara fell silent. But in his mind, Yagyu had already surpassed Sasuke as his primary target. Bang! The sound of a popping balloon echoed through the exam room as a large cloud of white smoke appeared at the front of the room. When the smoke cleared, the proctor, Marino Ibiki, stood at the podium with his team of exam supervisors. Since no conflicts had erupted before the exam, Marino Ibiki wasted no time. After explaining the rules of the exam, the first stage of the Chunin exams officially began. As the exam papers were handed out, most of the examinees looked troubled. Even Yagyu frowned slightly. While the questions on the test weren't difficult for him, they were much more advanced than anything they had studied in their 6th year at the academy. Understanding the real challenge of this exam, Yagyu relaxed. If the questions weren't this difficult, they wouldn't be able to push the examinees to cheat. With that in mind, Yagyu picked up the pen provided and began answering the questions. Before long, the examinees started using all sorts of tricks and techniques to copy answers from others. Even Gaara, seated beside Yagyu, used his third eye technique with sand to cheat. Yagyu glanced at Gaara, a small smile playing on his lips. He was curious what kind of expression Gaara had beneath his sand armor when he saw the exam questions. Meanwhile, several examinees attempted to copy Yagyu's answers. Yagyu noticed their methods but paid them no mind, allowing them to cheat freely. The real challenge of this test was yet to be revealed, the infamous 10th question, designed to mentally torment the weak. Those unable to handle the pressure would choose to forfeit. The other questions were merely supplementary. Still, Yagyu's habit of aiming for the top made him unwilling to leave the test blank, despite knowing its true purpose. He was always cautious, after all. If some kind of unexpected butterfly effect happened and he ended up failing, it would be an embarrassing joke. Before long, over half of the allotted exam time had passed. "Everyone, put your pens down," Marino Ibiki's voice rang out, signaling that it was time to reveal the 10th question. Chapter 43, The First Glimpse of Persuasion Jutsu, The Blind Admiration of the Three Girls. Next, I will announce the contents of the 10th question, but before that, you must make a choice. Just like in the original story, Marino Ibiki, before revealing the 10th question, gave the examinees a choice, whether to answer or not. If they chose to answer and got it wrong, they would never be allowed to become chunin. If they chose not to answer, they would automatically forfeit, and their entire team would be eliminated. This choice immediately caused a stir throughout the room. Some examinees, who had gone through great lengths to cheat, stood up angrily in protest. However, when Marino Ibiki removed his headband to reveal his scarred and bald head, coupled with his menacing Jonin aura, the entire room fell silent, intimidated by the head of the interrogation unit. The heavy, silent atmosphere began to mentally torment those examinees who were weak-willed or lacked confidence in their abilities. I quit. Soon enough, a candidate, unable to bear the psychological pressure, raised his hand to forfeit. As he left, he justified his decision: "I'm still young, I can always try again next time. I won't risk my ninja career on an unknown question." That statement became the final straw for several other candidates, who also raised their hands and forfeited. Seats that had been completely filled quickly began to empty as more candidates lost confidence and quit. Seeing more and more people dropping out, both Suzuki and Sakura, who had little faith in Naruto, fixed their worried gazes on Naruto's back, fearful that the class clown would raise his hand as well. As the clock neared the final 5 minutes, Naruto, trembling all over, slowly raised his hand under Suzuki and Sakura's worried stares. Bang! But in the next moment, Naruto slammed his hand down on the desk, drawing everyone's attention. "Don't underestimate me. I'm not going to run away. Even if I have to stay a genin for life, I'll still work hard to become Hokage. That's my ninja way. Bring it on, 10th question." His loud and determined voice filled the room, shaking everyone. The candidates who had been filled with doubt and hesitation suddenly felt a spark of inspiration. In that moment, they were infected by Naruto's sheer willpower, and the fear in their eyes was replaced with determination. The atmosphere in the exam room changed in an instant. Seeing this, Marino Ibiki and the proctors were stunned, their gazes filled with disbelief as they looked at Naruto. Yagyu, resting his chin on his hand, smiled as he watched Naruto's back. "So this is the power of persuasion jutsu. It's really impressive how it can inspire others." For Yagyu, this was good news. He wasn't sure if Ajura's chakra contained the consciousness of Otsutsuki Ajura himself. But now, Yagyu was quite certain that any trace of Otsutsuki Ajura's will remained with Naruto. The Ajura chakra that Yagyu had acquired was purely energy. This meant that there were no hidden tricks from the Sage of Six Paths tied to his Ajura chakra. The game system's level far surpasses that of the Sage of Six Paths. Time's up. I hereby announce: all of you have passed the first exam. Seeing that his psychological test had failed, Marino Ibiki didn't waste any time and immediately declared that everyone had passed. This announcement caused another uproar in the room. Many of the candidates who had steeled themselves to risk their ninja careers for the 10th question were left stunned. Several of them even broke down, standing up to angrily question Marino Ibiki, "What was the point of all our effort just now? Even though Ibiki explained that the first exam was meant to test their qualities as a ninja, many of the candidates still struggled to accept it. Only Naruto, who had just stabilized everyone's resolve with his persuasive speech, was beaming with joy. Did we just pass the first exam like that? Naruto thought, overjoyed. Even Hinata, sitting next to Naruto, looked at him in disbelief. She knew very well that Naruto hadn't answered a single question on his test sheet apart from writing his name. Passing the exam with a blank paper, how amazing! Hinata thought. She made a mental note to bring this up later when talking with Yagyu and Ino. Crash! Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass rang out as a kunao flew into the room. The proctor for the second exam, Mitarashi Anko, made a flashy, dramatic entrance, successfully diverting the candidate's attention. Ibiki, why are there so many left? She asked. Oh well, it doesn't matter. I'll make sure at least half of them are gone in the second exam. Even though no one responded to her dramatic entrance, Anko wasn't embarrassed. After taunting Ibiki, she scanned the room like a hunter eyeing prey. Hearing her words, many of the examinees felt a chill run down their spines. Anko quickly announced the time and location for the second exam, which would take place at 3 p.m. the next day at Konoha's 44th training ground, also known as the Forest of Death. After the exam was dismissed, Ino and Sakura immediately parted ways with their teams and headed over to Yagyu. Ino, always bold and outgoing, looped her arm through Yagyu's with a smile, prompting jealous glances from Hinata and Sakura. Yagyu, can I come over to your place for dinner? It's been so long since I've tasted your cooking. Of course, you're all welcome to come, Yagyu replied, using his height to ruffle Ino's hair playfully before smiling at the three girls. The sight of Yagyu surrounded by three cute girls attracted the attention of many, both from older Konoha shinobi and from shinobi from other villages. They all looked at Yagyu with envy and jealousy. Handsome, powerful, and surrounded by so many girls who like him. Which novel did this guy step out of as the main character? The female shinobi were just as envious, particularly of Hinata, who drew several hostile stares. Some of the girls even muttered quietly, "There's no way they're that big at her age. She must be stuffing something in there. Shameless." But Yagyu and the others were unaware of these thoughts and wouldn't have cared even if they had known. They were used to such reactions. After leaving the academy, the four of them who hadn't spent time together for months headed to the market to buy groceries and then returned home to cook. Like in Yagyu's previous life in Japan, women in this world were mostly expected to become housewives after marriage, rarely taking on missions. To have a man cook was seen as shameful. However, the three girls who were likely to become good wives and mothers in the future never stopped Yagyu from entering the kitchen. In fact, they only ever assisted him, because Yagyu's cooking was entirely different from what they were used to at home or from what was available outside. That's right, Yagyu was cooking Chinese food. Today was no exception. After preparing a feast to satisfy Ino and Sakura's taste buds, Yagyu didn't quiz them on their progress but instead took out a deck of cards. They played and chatted, sharing their experiences from the past few months. When Yagyu, Sakura, and Hinata talked about encountering high-level jonin from the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, Ino gasped in shock, her face filled with fear at the thought. But when she and Sakura heard that Yagyu had actually killed the jonin-level swordsman Reiga Kurosuke, they both looked at him with admiration, their eyes practically sparkling. Sakura, in particular, knew all too well the vast gap between a genin and a jonin after witnessing Zabuza's strength firsthand. Even with Naruto and Sasuke teaming up, they had only managed to evade Zabuza's water clone. Yet Yagyu had killed someone at that level. He really is amazing, just as expected from Yagyu. None of the three girls realized that they were becoming blindly infatuated with Yagyu's strength and talent. Looking at the three girls who were practically melting under his influence, Yagyu felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Once his plan succeeded, the only barrier left between him and the three girls would be their age. Chapter 44, Karin, a key part of the plan. The next day, at 2:30 p.m. Yagyu left home and headed to the usual meeting spot for Team 8, joining Shino Aberame and Hinata on their way to the Forest of Death. On the way, Shino shared his analysis. The 44th Training Ground, also known as the Forest of Death, is one of Konoha's restricted training areas. It's said to be a dense, untamed forest filled with dangerous beasts and poisonous insects. After returning yesterday, I did some research on the training ground. The forest is surrounded by an iron fence and has 44 entrances. At the center is a building called the Central Tower. The distance from any entrance to the tower is exactly 10,000 meters, which is 10 kilometers. If my guess is correct, the Central Tower should be the endpoint of the second exam. As for the test itself, if it's not a race, it might involve gathering specific items in the forest and bringing them to the Central Tower to pass the exam. If the objective is to collect items in the forest, we'll likely encounter other teams, which could lead to battles over those items. Hearing this, Yagyu was a bit surprised as he looked at Shino. He's pretty spot on. No wonder he's one of the most reliable and mysterious characters in the early arcs. Yagyu decided to give a little spoiler. When the proctor announced the exam, she said half of us would be eliminated. If it's about gathering items, there might only be enough for half the teams, meaning this exam could force us into fights over those items. Indeed. Shino nodded and added, if that's the case, this exam will work to our advantage. You two handle the sensing, Shino, Hinata. Understood. While chatting, Team 8 arrived outside the Forest of Death, where most of the other examinees had already gathered. Mitarashi Anko was munching on dango while directing the proctor team to set up tents, though it wasn't clear what they were for. When there were 20 minutes left until the start, and all the candidates had arrived, Anko began explaining the content and rules of the exam. The second exam would be a scroll battle. There were two types of scrolls, the Scroll of Heaven and the Scroll of Earth. Each team would be randomly given one scroll and would have to obtain the other by stealing it from another team. The goal was to bring both scrolls to the Central Tower to pass the second exam. The candidates would have 120 hours, or 5 days, to complete the exam. While Anko explained the rules, her casual and teasing tone irritated Naruto, who couldn't help but mimic and provoke her, only to be swiftly punished by a skewer jab from Anko, leaving him with a small trauma. This little episode even led to an unintentional reunion between Orochimaru and Anko, though Anko didn't realize it at the time. Now, with 10 minutes left, come and sign your death waiver, Anko teased with a smirk. Of course, if you're scared, you can always turn around and go home. Knowing how twisted the proctor's personality was, none of the examinees got angry. Instead, each team lined up to sign the waivers. Afterward, the team leaders entered the tents to receive their respective scrolls. With their scroll in hand, Team 8 followed a proctor to one of the 44 entrances, waiting for the exam to begin. As the final 10 seconds ticked away, the proctors at the entrances unlocked the gates. Anko's voice echoed through the speakers, "The second exam of the Chunin exams begin." With her words, the examinees at the 44 entrances dashed into the forest, some running at full speed, while others vanished in blurs. However, a few teams, including Team 8, chose to walk leisurely into the forest. "Hinata, you hold onto the Earth Scroll," Yagyu said, handing the scroll to her. "Use your Byakugan to scout for targets, but don't rush into action. Let them fight it out for a while, or wait for them to come to us. Understood. Hinata nodded obediently. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Yagyu quickly formed the hand signs, summoning 3 shadow clones. As soon as the clones appeared, they sprinted off in different directions. Seeing this, Shino asked, Yagyu, are you looking for Team 7 and Team 10? Yes, Yagyu nodded. Forgive me for being selfish, Shino. I just can't help but worry about them. But that's a lie. While Yagyu was indeed searching for Ino and Sakura, that was merely a side task. He knew very well that the 2 girls would be fine. Yagyu's main target was someone much more important, one of the 3 ultimate devoted followers alongside Obito and Sakura Karin. She was a key piece in Yagyu's plan, and he had to intercept her before Sasuke did. Shino, unaware of Yagyu's true intentions, shook his head after hearing Yagyu's slightly apologetic tone. It's fine. There's no reward for being the fastest in this exam. With Hinata's Byakugan, do whatever you need. Thanks, Shino. Yagyu patted Shino on the shoulder, and the trio continued their leisurely walk through the forest. Hinata kept her Byakugan activated, regularly reporting what was happening within a kilometer around them. Several nearby teams, using their own sensory abilities, managed to locate Team 8. But when they realized who they were up against, they immediately turned tail and fled, faster than when they had approached. Yagyu, Hinata, and Shino didn't bother to chase them down. Of course, not everyone was so afraid. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 figures appeared in the treetops above, looking down at the seemingly relaxed Team 8 as if they were on a camping trip. The figures formed hand signs, preparing to launch a surprise attack. At that moment, Yagyu suddenly looked up at them. In an instant, the 3 attackers froze, their eyes wide and bodies trembling as if struggling to break free from invisible restraints but failing. This was none other than the binding jutsu. 8 trigrams, air palm. Hinata dashed forward, unleashing 3 bursts of distorted air towards the attacker's location. Frozen in place, the 3 became easy targets, hit directly by the air blasts. They spat out blood as they fell to the ground. Their bodies slammed hard into the forest floor, further worsening their internal injuries caused by Hinata's chakra-infused attacks. But it wasn't over yet. A swarm of insects crawled onto their necks, burrowing into their bodies and rapidly consuming their chakra. In just a few seconds, the 3 went from full health to near death. If the other candidates who had fled earlier saw this, they would have been glad they had run, grateful for their wise decision. Yagyu shook his head in disbelief. Idiots like these actually made it past the first exam without forfeiting. I guess being reckless has its advantages. To think they would try to ambush us, knowing we have a Byakugan user. These 3 reminded Yagyu of the demon brothers clearly, brains were in short supply. Chapter 45, The Nosebleed Girl. Even though those 3 idiots had attacked them, they did bring something useful for Team 8. Yagyu-kun, they have a heaven scroll, Hinata said as she found a scroll on one of the fallen enemies, with the seal marked heaven. Great, we've got everything we need. Now, let's go find Ino and Sakura, Yagyu nodded with satisfaction. At the same time, his 3 shadow clones activated their Sharingan and began searching the Forest of Death for Karin. The Forest of Death was large, with the distance from any entrance to the central tower being 10 kilometers. Walking from the east side to the west would cover 20 kilometers in total. While this was not a big deal for the body flicker technique, it did present a challenge for Yagyu's Sharingan's farsight abilities. At first, Yagyu thought finding Karin would be easy. After all, besides Naruto and Gaara, Karin and Orochimaru had the most chakra reserves. He thought he just needed to look for a significant chakra signature in the red world of his Sharingan. However, he quickly realized he was wrong. While Karin's chakra would be incredible in the future, that wasn't the case now. At this point, Karin was merely a mobile blood bag for her teammates from the grass village, who only kept her around to heal their injuries. Every time they were hurt, they would bite Karin to recover. Due to this mistreatment and her poor living conditions in the grass village, Karin's chakra reserves were nowhere near what they should be for an Uzumaki clan member. Perhaps this is why her red hair hadn't drawn much attention. After all, while the Uzumaki clan had been known for red hair, there were many other redheads in the ninja world. With the Uzumaki clan mostly wiped out, having red hair no longer made someone immediately suspicious of being an Uzumaki unless they possessed enormous chakra. Realizing this, Yagyu's shadow clones stopped quickly glancing over every kunoichi and began observing them more carefully. After about an hour of searching, one of Yagyu's clones finally located Karin. The clone dissipated into a cloud of white smoke, sending its memories back to Yagyu. Upon confirming Karin's location, Yagyu immediately led Shino and Hinata in that direction. As the day began to fade into evening, Yagyu suggested, "It's getting dark. Let's continue tomorrow. I'll go find some food. You two gather firewood around here," Yagyu said, vanishing with the body flicker technique before they could respond. Moving swiftly through the forest, Yagyu created another shadow clone. Leaving the clone to hunt for food, Yagyu activated his Sharingan's farsight, scanning the area for Karin. A short while later, Yagyu moved beyond Hinata's Byakugan range and, 2 kilometers away, found Karin. As fate would have it, just as the sun was setting, Karin's teammates had sent her out to gather food. Yagyu sped up, arriving at Karin's teammates first. "You are." Seeing Yagyu suddenly appear, the two grass ninja immediately recognized him. Before they could say anything, their surroundings suddenly shifted. One moment they were in the forest, and the next, they found themselves trapped in a blood-red space. Above them hung an enormous red moon, with 3 black tomos slowly rotating inside it. Their bodies were impaled by several large black stakes, and the intense pain made them want to scream. However, having lost control of their bodies, they couldn't even open their mouths. To avoid any complications, Yagyu had directly cast a combination of 2 genjutsu, demonic illusion, shackling stakes and binding jutsu. Crack! The sound of their necks breaking echoed along with the shattering of the illusionary space. Before the grass ninja could even regain consciousness, darkness completely consumed them. Outside the genjutsu, Yagyu snapped their necks, effortlessly placing the much smaller bodies of the grass ninja into his space storage. He then used the body flicker technique to close in on Karin. At this moment, Karin, having not yet awakened her mind's eye of the Kagura, was too timid to hunt and could only gather edible plants. If Yagyu hadn't come, Karin would likely return to her teammates and face more verbal abuse or even physical punishment for her failure. But from today onward, your fate will change, Yagyu thought to himself. He then vanished once more, quickly locating a large black bear nearby. Using his Sharingan, Yagyu hypnotized the bear, making it walk towards Karin. Yagyu didn't wait for the bear to attack Karin, as it would be a waste of time and could give Sasuke a chance to interfere. He intended to orchestrate a hero saving the damsel in distress scenario himself. Though it felt somewhat manipulative, Yagyu believed the result would be far better than Karin's original fate in the manga. Roar! The black bear soon found Karin. Its fierce roar immediately sent Karin, who had been crouching down to gather mushrooms, stumbling backward in fear, falling to the ground. Staring at the massive bear charging toward her with its mouth wide open, Karen's face turned pale, and her body trembled as she desperately tried to stand and run. However, her legs refused to cooperate. Someone! Help! She screamed, summoning all her strength in a desperate cry for help, hoping for a miracle. Whoosh! As if the heavens had heard her, a miracle indeed appeared. A shrill whistling sound cut through the air, and a kunao shot straight into the bear's head. The poor bear collapsed to the ground in a heap, unable to rise again. "Are you all right?" A voice as gentle and warm as the morning sun drifted into Karen's ears. Looking up toward the source of the voice, Karen saw a tall figure descending from the sky, landing before her with a kind smile. Although the sun was setting and the forest was already shrouded in twilight, to Karen, Yagyu appeared even brighter than the sun, radiating a golden light. His handsome face, gentle smile, and upright stance. In that moment, Karen felt as though she had found the real-life version of the heroes and princes she had read about in books and plays, like she was living in a dream. Her gaze turned dazed and dreamy. Seeing Karen staring blankly at him, Yagyu tilted his head slightly in confusion. "I didn't even use genjutsu, why is she acting so spaced out?" Bending down, Yagyu waved a hand in front of her face. "Are you all right?" Snapped out of her daze, Karen's face turned crimson when she saw Yagyu's handsome face so close. She quickly looked down, nervously clenching her hands together. I'm fine." Drib. A drop of blood suddenly fell onto Karen's hand. Seeing this, Yagyu's expression shifted in surprise. "You're bleeding. How can you say you're fine?" Buzz. His words caused Karen to turn as red as boiling water, a white fog seemingly rising from her head. Still recovering from her shock, Karen's vision went black, and she fainted, collapsing onto the ground. Chapter 46, The Infatuated Girl, Karen joins Konoha. Karen wasn't sure how long she had been unconscious. When she finally woke up, it was completely dark outside. However, the forest at night wasn't cold, as a warm sensation continuously flowed from nearby. Turning her head, she saw a campfire burning next to her, with sizzling meat roasting above it. "You're awake." A gentle voice reached her ears as a hand skillfully flipped the meat on the fire. Following the movement of the hand, her eyes landed on the handsome face she had seen repeatedly in her dreams before she fainted. This told her that this wasn't a dream after all. Recalling how she had fainted, Karen's face turned red again, though luckily, the glow of the fire masked it. Hastily, she got up and bowed toward Yagyu. "Thank you for saving." Before she could finish speaking, her vision darkened again, and she wobbled, almost falling into the fire. Yagyu quickly grabbed her small hand, pulling her into his arms. Holding the girl, whose frame was similar to Sakura's, Yagyu had no inappropriate thoughts. He gently placed her down by the fire and advised, "Your body is too weak right now. Don't get overly emotional. You can thank me when you're feeling better." With that, Yagyu handed her a skewer of roasted meat. "Here, eat something." "Thank you," Karen whispered in a voice as soft as a mosquito, much like Hinata's. Her head was still buzzing. "He smells so good." Even better than the food, Karen thought to herself as she ate. Yagyu, unaware of her thoughts, would have been at a loss if he knew. So, the infatuated girl trait really is true. He mused internally. Yagyu also picked up a skewer and began to eat, cutting straight to the point. "I gave you some basic treatment earlier. What's the story behind those bite marks on your arm?" This. Karen's mind went blank. Rather than explaining her ability, her first thought was whether the bite marks would disgust Yagyu, the person who had saved her. She worried that her hero might look at her with disdain. Seeing that Karin was struggling to speak, Yagyu continued, I checked the bite marks. They vary in size and shape, so it's clear they weren't all made by the same person. And while your body is healthy, your chakra levels are unusually low, far below what they should be for someone of your constitution. Does your ability involve giving your chakra to others? Hearing that there was no disgust in Yagyu's voice, Karin let out a heavy sigh of relief. Yes, that's my ability, she nodded, not hiding anything. But I don't just provide chakra. My ability heals injuries. Ever since I was little, I noticed my body was different. No matter the injury, as long as someone bites me, they recover quickly. But the cost is that the more severe the injury, the more chakra I have to use. If my chakra isn't replenished, it drains my life force. That's how my mother died. As she finished speaking, her eyes dimmed with sadness. Not wanting her to dwell on painful memories, Yagyu gently patted her shoulder and shifted the conversation. We haven't even introduced ourselves yet. My name is Yagyu. What's yours? Perhaps it was the care in Yagyu's voice, but Karin, who had long since steeled her heart, suddenly felt tears well up in her eyes. She choked up as she replied, I'm Karin. Just like many other talented orphans in the ninja world, after her mother's death, Karin had never felt cared for or valued by anyone. She had only ever been treated as a replacement for her mother, used as a medical tool. But now, she felt the warmth that only her mother had ever given her, coming from someone from an enemy village, no less. In this moment, Karin broke down emotionally. Seeing her tears, Yagyu knew it was time to make his move. He patted her trembling shoulder again and softly asked, Karin, do you have a family name? And no. Do you know what your ability is called? Karin, her face now streaked with tears, shook her head. And no idea. You said earlier that your mother had the same ability, right? Yeah. Then I think I know what your ability is, and also your ancestral surname. Seeing Karin's puzzled look, Yagyu smiled and explained, if I'm not mistaken, you're a descendant of the Uzumaki clan, and your ability is called physical healing. The Uzumaki clan physical healing. Karin's confusion deepened. The grass village was a small, minor village with little historical knowledge. There was no way they would have any records about the long-extinct Uzumaki clan. If they had known about the Uzumaki clan, both she and her mother would have been treated differently. In fact, they wouldn't have even sent her to the Chunin exams in Konoha. Clearly, Karin knew nothing about the ancient, powerful clan that had perished long ago. Yagyu continued, the Uzumaki clan were distant relatives of the Senju clan, which is why Konoha has complete records about them. From what I know, the Uzumaki clan lived on an island and built a village called Uzushiagakur. They were close allies of Konoha. But because the Uzumaki clan was so skilled with sealing techniques, many nations feared them. Several decades ago, they joined forces to attack Uzushiagakur. Konoha arrived too late to save the village, but we managed to rescue one person. She went on to marry the fourth Hokage. Karin was stunned, processing this revelation. Yagyu continued, the Uzumaki clan's defining traits include red hair and massive chakra reserves, as well as several unique abilities, one of which is physical healing just like yours. If I'm right, Karin, your mother, or perhaps your grandparents, were survivors of the Uzumaki clan. Karin was completely dazed, struggling to comprehend that her background and abilities had such a significant origin. Then Yagyu asked, Karin, would you like to join Konoha? Hey! Karin's eyes widened, her face lighting up with excitement. See, can I? Karin wasn't necessarily drawn to Konoha itself. Her history and abilities were just stories to her. After all, that was all ancient history, and she felt no connection to it. But the idea of joining Konoha, of being in the same village as Yagyu, made her heart race with anticipation. However, doubts crept in, and she hesitated. I'm a ninja from the grass village. Would Konoha really accept someone like me? They definitely would. Yagyu nodded confidently. Your red hair and your abilities are proof of your lineage. I'll ask my sensei to recommend you to the Hokage. I'm sure the Hokage will agree to let you join. I want to join Konoha. Without hesitation, Karin nodded eagerly. She knew this was her one chance to change her fate and get closer to Yagyu. After living in darkness ever since her mother's death, she couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip away. Great! Once the Chunin exams are over, I'll ask my sensei to make the recommendation to the Hokage. Yagyu stood up and extended his hand to her with a smile. Welcome to Konoha, Karin. Under the glow of the campfire, Yagyu seemed to shine in Karin's eyes, making her gaze turn dreamy once again. In that moment, she even felt a surge of gratitude toward the grass village, a village she had long despised. If it hadn't been for them forcing her to take part in the Chunin exams, she might never have met Yagyu in her entire life. Chapter 47, His wings are not for just anyone to beat. Were those two people nearby your companions? They ran off as soon as they saw me, Yagyu asked. That's just how they are, Karin responded. Both my mother and I were outsiders, and Kyuzagaku never trusted people like us. When they sent me here to participate in the Chunin exams, I was already prepared to die. Did you have a jonin supervising you? No, Kyuzagaku is just a small village with very few jonin. They only sent 2 teams to fulfill a neighboring country's invitation. In that case, let me handle things for you. Yagyu, whatever you say, I'll do. I'll follow your lead. In the stillness of the nighttime forest, 2 figures walked along the forest path, chatting. Just like Haku and Kimimaro, once Karin decided on someone to follow, she would devote herself to them for life. Even if she could never become his equal, even if she were hurt countless times by the person she loved, Karin would never hate him or turn into some twisted, obsessed version of herself. As long as the one she loved was happy, she would be satisfied, living out her days without marrying. This was the difference between an ordinary admirer and the ultimate devotee. And Yagyu now had 2 of these ultimate followers. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Yagyu secretly activated his Sharingan to use both telescopic and X-ray vision as he led Karin to one of the entrances of the Forest of Death. There, he formed a hand sign and created a shadow clone. He then pulled out an envelope full of money from his clothing and handed it to Karin. The Chunin exams will take some time. To prevent your companions from discovering you, and since you can't leave the village officially yet, I suggest you stay somewhere in the Land of Fire for now. Once the Chunin exams are over, I'll bring my Jonin sensei to find you and escort you back to Konoha. Take this money and use it to rent a place and get some decent food. Karin hurriedly shook her head, waving her hands in refusal. Yagyu, you don't need to give me money. I can find some place to stay on my own. Take it. Yagyu's gentle demeanor suddenly shifted as he forcefully pushed the envelope into Karin's hand. Then, with a soft smile, he said, "Your body is too weak right now. If you don't take care of yourself, the Hokage might not believe you're a descendant of the Uzumaki clan. If you feel bad about it, consider it a loan. Once you join Konoha and start earning money from missions, you can pay me back." All right. Once again, Karin felt the warmth that only her mother used to give her, and with tears welling up in her eyes, she nodded vigorously. "Go ahead now. While it's dark and no one's around, my shadow clone will lead you out of Konoha," Yagyu said. "Okay." Just as Karin was about to leave with the shadow clone, she turned and asked, "Yagyu, where should I wait for you?" Yagyu smiled faintly and softly spoke a name, "Tanzaku Town." After seeing Karin off, Yagyu quickly used the body flicker technique to return to where Shino and Hinata were waiting. Yagyu felt no concerns about Karin's safety. It was the dead of night, and with the illusory powers of his Sharingan, which even the Byakugan couldn't detect, Karin could easily walk out of the village without raising any alarms. Using his Sharingan to scan the area, Yagyu searched for Team 8's position. Once he entered a certain range, the Shadow Clone, which had been with Team 8 and also using its Sharingan to keep watch, vanished in a puff of smoke. Shino and Hinata didn't react with surprise. Yagyu's shadow clone had already informed them it wasn't the original Yagyu when it returned with the hunted prey. When Yagyu's real self appeared, Shino asked, "Did you find who you were looking for?" "No, I wasn't searching for anyone just now," Yagyu replied, shaking his head with an already prepared answer. "While I was out hunting, I met someone interesting. I'll introduce them to you when there's a chance." "Someone from another village?" Shino asked. "Yeah. Her identity is a bit special, and I'll need to speak with Kurane-sensei after the exam," Yagyu replied with a nod, hinting that he didn't want to elaborate further. Shino didn't press for more details, but both he and Hinata became a little curious about this mysterious person. If Yagyu, who rarely wasted time, thought highly enough of this person to speak with Kurane, they must be someone significant. Both Shino and Hinata started thinking about the various candidates from the first exam, wondering if any of them matched Yagyu's description. Seeing them deep in thought, Yagyu smiled. "You two can rest now. I'll keep watch." "All right." The next morning arrived quickly. After retrieving some water from a storage scroll to freshen up, Team 8 resumed their search for Team 7 and Team 10. Suddenly, as if something came to his mind, Yagyu's expression shifted slightly. He quickly formed hand signs and created several more shadow clones. This time, the clones moved at lightning speed, spreading out with their Sharingan activated, searching for Team 7's location. Even without finding them yet, Yagyu knew what had happened to them. By now, Team 7 had definitely encountered Orochimaru disguised as a grass ninja. Sasuke Uchiha had likely been marked with the curse mark of heaven, and Naruto had fallen under Orochimaru's 5 elements seal, leaving both unconscious. The only one still awake was Sakura. That was why Yagyu's shadow clones were moving with such urgency. Because Yakushi Kabuto didn't get a chance to display his acting skills in the first exam, Yagyu had momentarily forgotten about a few lesser threats. But suddenly, he remembered, after Orochimaru gave Sasuke the curse mark, he ordered the Sound Ninja Trio to eliminate him. Orochimaru's real goal was to provoke Sasuke's curse mark and make him crave the power that Orochimaru could offer. However, the Sound Ninja Trio was a bit too eager. They found Team 7 before Sasuke even woke up. With both of her teammates unconscious, Sakura was left to face the trio alone. In the original story, this was the battle where Sakura had her first transformation, cutting her hair and taking her first step toward becoming the formidable Sakura-chan we know. While transformation was beneficial for the original Sakura, this Sakura didn't need it. Having grown up alongside Yagyu and the others, Sakura had already gone through her transformation. Now, she was a competent and even exceptional support ninja. If it weren't for her limited chakra as a child, Yagyu would have taught her water release techniques long ago. Sakura's chakra attributes, much like Yagyu's before graduation, were yin, yang, water, and earth. After graduating, Yagyu didn't teach her new jutsu but instead had her focus on honing her sensing and medical skills, setting her up to leave a lasting impression on Kakashi. After Team 7 temporarily disbanded, Yagyu planned for her to follow the same path as in the original story and be recommended by Kakashi to Tsunade. However, Sakura still wasn't much of a fighter yet. Before she got hurt at the hands of the Sound Ninja Trio, Yagyu had to find her. "No one can harm my wings." With his shadow clones working at full speed, they quickly located Sakura's position. The moment the shadow clone dispelled itself and sent back its memories, Yagyu's eyes flashed with cold determination. He turned to Hinata and Shino and said, "Sakura's in trouble. I'll head there first. Follow me as fast as you can." Before they could respond, Yagyu's body flickered out of sight, leaving behind only a faint, barely visible afterimage darting across the treetops. In a blink of an eye, Yagyu vanished from Shino and Hinata's view. Shino's pupils shrank behind his dark glasses. So this is Yagyu's real speed. Even his body flicker technique was hidden so deeply. Chapter 48, The First Victim of the Raise Nan. In a certain area of the Forest of Death, two girls were engaged in a fierce battle between two towering trees. The sound of explosions, like popping balloons, and the constant swishing of projectiles filled the air, startling nearby animals and sending them fleeing in all directions. Zooming in on the scene, we see Sakura using her sensory techniques and continuously disrupting the flow of chakra in her body to break the genjutsu in front of her. From Sakura's perspective, multiple afterimages of the dark-haired girl before her kin, one of the three sound ninjas, were attacking her, along with the real one, throwing an endless barrage of senbon needles. Faced with Kin's needle attacks, Sakura skillfully used the substitution jutsu, swapping places with pieces of wood she had prepared in advance. At the same time, she threw smoke bombs from her tool pouch, aiming them at Kin. Each time the smoke obscured Kin's vision, Sakura retaliated with shuriken. Thanks to her strong sensory abilities and solid foundation, Sakura managed to leave several wounds on Kin, humiliating her in front of her comrades. However, Sakura wasn't in great shape either. Her face was covered in bruises, with red handprints on her cheeks, and there were traces of blood on her lips, clear signs she had been slapped around. The truth was, Sakura hadn't expected to face such a monstrous opponent during the Chunin exams. Both Naruto and Sasuke, who was second only to Yagyu, had been completely overpowered by a strange grass ninja. In that grass ninja, Sakura had felt an overwhelming gap, something far more terrifying than even Zabuza. At that moment, Sakura had thought she was surely going to die. But, for reasons unknown, the grass ninja didn't kill her, Naruto, or Sasuke. Instead, he placed a black curse mark on Sasuke's neck and then left. Sakura had tried healing Naruto and Sasuke afterward and found their bodies in good health, yet they hadn't woken up since the night before. Left alone, Sakura moved them to a tree hollow and camouflaged the entrance with an invisibility technique. But not long after sunrise, the Sound Ninja Trio found them, and they were targeting Sasuke specifically. Having already bonded with her teammates over time, Sakura couldn't bring herself to abandon them. Instead, she bravely stood up to fight. Kin, who had grown up in the harsh environment of Otagakure, was disgusted by Sakura's privileged upbringing and insisted on teaching her a lesson personally. Confident in their abilities, the other two members of the Sound team, Dosu and Zaku, didn't rush to complete Orochimaru's task. They let Kin play with Sakura first. At first, the two fought hand to hand. As one of the top 10 students of her class, Sakura had scored either perfect or near-perfect marks in all subjects. Her combat skills, honed from sparring with Yagyu and Hinata since childhood, were on par with Kin, who had grown up fighting for survival in Otogakuer. However, Sakura hadn't anticipated that her opponent would be a genjutsu user, specifically one who used sound-based genjutsu. Without prior knowledge of Kin's techniques, Sakura was caught off guard during their close combat. However, rather than landing a lethal blow, Kin opted to slap Sakura around, showing her disdain. Realizing she couldn't win in close quarters, Sakura smartly put some distance between herself and Kin, which was why she had been using substitution techniques and smoke bombs. But her tools were running out, and soon enough, she had no more shuriken or smoke bombs left. Since this was her first real fight to the death, Sakura, who had only extensive experience in taijutsu, was soon caught in Kin's genjutsu again and was sent flying with a kick. Her body tumbled across the ground, and before she could rise, a foot pressed down on her back. One of her arms and her pink hair were grabbed tightly. "Has anyone ever told you that your face and your hair are absolutely hideous?" Kin yanked on Sakura's pink hair, her words laced with mocking jealousy. What Kin envied wasn't just Sakura's pink hair but also her red kippao and the privileged air she carried. They were around the same age, yet Kin was an orphan who had struggled to become a genin in the harsh conditions of Otogakuer, while this girl was born in Konoha, one of the 5 great shinobi villages. Sakura had beautiful hair and clothes and had easily obtained the headband that Kin had fought so hard for. Sakura was weak, so why did she have all of this? Even though her hair and arm were being tugged, Sakura didn't cry out or beg for mercy. She simply looked at Kin with her green eyes, unafraid, and even a little disdainful. "What's with that look?" Kin, enraged by Sakura's defiance, yanked harder on her hair and shouted, "You need to recognize your position. You're just a loser, and I'm the one who's winning." Though the pain in her scalp caused Sakura to frown, she managed a smile despite her bruised face. "You've already lost. You should blame yourself for not killing me when you had the chance." "Are you talking nonsense because I hit you too hard?" Kin sneered. "I can kill you now, but I'm not going to let you die that easily. I'll pull out all your hair, slash your face, gouge out your eyes, and let you die in agony." As Kin prepared to yank Sakura's hair with all her strength, her eyes suddenly widened, and her pupils contracted in shock. Her wrist, which had been holding Sakura's hair, was now gripped by a large hand. A tall figure had appeared beside her out of nowhere. But that wasn't the real issue. The real problem was that the moment her wrist was grabbed, her body became completely paralyzed, as if she had lost all control over it. Kin binding jutsu. Kin recognized the technique immediately, being a genjutsu user herself, but before she could disrupt her chakra flow to break free, her expression twisted in agony, and she let out a scream. The intense pain caused her to release Sakura's hair and arm involuntarily. Yagyu had stabbed a kunai deep into the crook of her elbow, forcing her to let go. Once Kin had released Sakura's hair, Yagyu twisted her wrist with a sharp motion. The sickening sound of bone snapping filled the air, and Kin screamed in agony, her eyes red with pain. Dosuo and Zaku, who had been standing by and watching from a distance, finally snapped to attention. As they rushed to rescue Kin, Yagyu spun and, with a powerful kick, sent her flying toward them. Before they could catch her, Yagyu reappeared in front of the airborne Kin, a glowing blue sphere of swirling energy in his hand. He slammed the raised nan into her body. In an instant, Kin's body spun violently in the air, her speed multiplied several times over as she flew like a spinning boulder toward Dosuo and Zaku. Seeing this, both Dosuo and Zaku abandoned their attempts to catch her and dodged out of the way. Kin's body flew between them, crashing a great distance away into a massive tree, leaving a deep crater in the trunk before finally coming to a stop. Chapter 49, Uchiha Sasuke's Realization and Battle Spirit. Gulp. Staring at Kin, who was embedded in the tree trunk, her life or death uncertain, Dosu and Zaku couldn't help but swallow hard. If you looked closely, you could see beads of cold sweat forming on their foreheads and near their temples. They weren't terrified by Kin's dire state but by the jutsu Yagyu had just used. No hand signs at all. And yet, it was such a powerful jutsu without any hand signs. Dosu, having gathered his wits, wasted no time in pulling out the scroll with the character Earth on it. He addressed Yagyu, saying, "We surrender. Take this scroll. Can we leave?" "No. You're all going to leave your lives here as well." Another highly concentrated spinning ball of energy appeared in Yagyu's hand. Decapitating airwaves. Ah! Seeing Yagyu refuse the trade, Zaku clapped his hands together to unleash his strongest sonic attack. But before he could even gather chakra and convert it into sound waves, he let out a piercing scream, his expression twisting in agony. Startled by Zaku's sudden cries, Dosu looked over to see him twitching uncontrollably, his face contorted in pain, his eyes bloodshot, yet nothing appeared to be wrong with him. "Zaku, you're trapped in a genjutsu. Break free, quickly!" Dosu yelled. But Zaku didn't seem to hear Dosu's voice. He had already collapsed to the ground, rolling around in agony. "Ah! I'm burning! Put out the fire! Put it out!" In Zaku's view, the entire forest had turned into a sea of flames, and his body was engulfed in fire. Being burned alive, one of the most excruciating ways to die, left Zaku in unbearable pain, unable even to break the genjutsu. The technique Yagyu had used was the illusion, Shiranui illusion of invisible flames. How could you be so careless? While Dosu was distracted by Zaku's torment, Yagyu swiftly moved in and slammed a raised nan into Dosu's body. Boom! With a loud blast, Dosu's body shot back like a cannonball, spinning in midair just like Kin had, his body swirling with blue chakra as he slammed hard into a massive tree. A deep crater instantly appeared on the tree's trunk, and Dosu's body was embedded in it, his fate unclear. Swish! 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 Without a shred of hesitation, Yagyu retrieved 3 kunao, which he expertly threw with precision, hitting the heads of all 3 members of the sound trio, ending their lives. Swoosh! 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 White lights flashed from their bodies, and as beams of light flew off, several glowing orbs floated above the ground near their corpses. Yagyu merely glanced at the glowing orbs before turning and walking toward Sakura. At this moment, Sakura had her back to Yagyu, and a faint green light was glowing in front of her as she treated her injuries. "Sakura, are you okay?" Yagyu patted Sakura's head from behind and asked with concern. Sakura, hiding her face with one hand that glowed with green healing chakra, replied with her head lowered, "Don't look at me, Yagyu. I look ugly right now." "Not at all, you looked really cool just now." Yagyu chuckled and tousled her hair. "You're healing yourself too slowly. Let me help." "No way. You've got a camera on you. What if you secretly take a picture?" Sakura teased in a playful, slightly sulky tone. "Hinata told me you always take pictures of her. I don't want you snapping a photo of me looking like this." I won't. "Geez, Hinata tells you guys everything," Yagyu said with a sheepish smile. Before Sakura could respond, Yagyu's brow furrowed as he turned his attention toward a cave. Sakura also paused her healing and looked toward the cave where Naruto and Sasuke were, her eyes filled with shock. "Sasuke's awake. What happened to his chakra?" Sakura, who hurt your face? Sasuke's voice echoed from the cave. Emerging from the shadows of the cave was Sasuke, his body radiating purple chakra and exuding an ominous aura. Half of his face was covered in the black markings of the cursed seal, and his dual Tomo Sharingan was activated. His gaze landed on Yagyu and Sakura, but his focus immediately shifted to Sakura's bruised face, prompting him to ask. An enemy came by earlier, but Yagyu took care of them, Sakura explained simply, before asking worriedly, Sasuke, are you okay? Yeah. I'm fine. Sasuke glanced at the black curse mark spreading across his left arm and, feeling a surge of exhilaration, said, not only am I fine, but I feel better than ever. I feel like I can do anything. However, his words only made Sakura more uneasy. Suddenly, Sasuke turned his gaze toward Yagyu, his smile wicked as he challenged, Yagyu, how about a fight? No thanks. You're not yourself right now. Yagyu shook his head and cautioned, I don't know what's happening to your body, but this chakra doesn't belong to you. Are you willing to abandon the pride of the Uchiha clan to rely on external power like this? Humph. At those words, Sasuke's grin faltered, and a wave of pain washed over him as he groaned, the Sharingan fading back to his normal black eyes. Grabbing at his neck, he crouched down in discomfort. A moment later, Sasuke stood back up, weakened but with the curse mark receding from his face and arm. Once his emotions had settled, Sasuke glanced at Zaku's corpse and then at the bodies of Kin and Dosuo embedded in the tree. His gaze returned to Sakura, and with a slightly apologetic tone, he said, I'm sorry, Sakura, for getting you involved. I'm just glad you're both alright. Seeing Sasuke back to his normal self, Sakura finally breathed a sigh of relief and apologized, I'm the one who should apologize. I wasn't able to help much. Standing up to an enemy like that is impressive enough. Yagyu couldn't help but pinch Sakura's cheek, causing her to wince and hiss in pain. Let me heal you, your chakra is too weak. Yagyu crouched down and began healing the wounds on Sakura's face. Sakura quickly closed her eyes, her cheeks turning red, while muttering, hurry up. I can sense Hinata's chakra nearby. I can't let her see me like this. She's got the Byakugan. She's probably already seen you. That doesn't count. She sees in black and white. Alright, alright. You win. While Yagyu and Sakura exchanged playful banter, Sasuke, clutching his neck, approached Zaku's body, and then examined the corpses of Kin and Dosuo embedded in the tree. More precisely, he scrutinized the damage around them. After a few moments, Sasuke's eyes widened as though he had realized something. Suddenly, despite the pain from the curse mark, he forced his dual Tomo Sharingan to activate again, fixing his gaze on Yagyu, who had just finished healing Sakura. His expression showed a mixture of shock and intense battle spirit. Such incredible chakra! This must be your true power. I had no idea you were hiding so much. This is perfect. Only someone like you is worthy of being my opponent. Only by defeating the real you can I avenge my past humiliation and prove the strength of the Uchiha. Chapter 50, The End of the Second Exam. Sakura, are you alright? Hee. I almost got taken out, but luckily Yagyu arrived just in time. Just as Yagyu finished healing Sakura, Hinata and Shino appeared with a swift movement. Hinata immediately checked on Sakura's condition, using her Byakugan to examine the flow of chakra in her body, making sure there were no internal injuries. Fortunately, aside from some chakra depletion, Sakura hadn't suffered any serious harm. The two friends then stepped aside to chat quietly. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Yagyu performed a hand seal and created 3 shadow clones. From somewhere, he produced 3 storage scrolls and sent the clones to collect the bodies of the Sound Ninja trio. Uchiha Sasuke seemed a bit surprised, unsure why Yagyu would bother collecting the bodies of the enemies. But he didn't ask, as these bodies were Yagyu's spoils of battle, after all. Shino, on the other hand, wasn't surprised at all. He assumed that Yagyu was simply being cautious, not wanting anyone else to discover his secrets. Once the shadow clones had finished cleaning up the bodies of the Sound Ninja trio, they returned the storage scrolls to Yagyu and handed him the Scroll of Earth. Yagyu first stored the scrolls away and then raised the Scroll of Earth toward Sasuke, asking, "We've already gathered both the Scroll of Heaven and Earth. Do you want this one?" "No, we'll get our own," Sasuke replied without hesitation, just as Yagyu had expected. His pride wouldn't allow him to accept help. "All right then, see you at the central tower." Yagyu stored the Scroll of Earth and then walked over to Hinata, saying to Sakura, "Sasuke's awake now, so it's time for us to go. After all, we're competitors." "Yes, see you at the central tower," Sakura responded with a reluctant but warm smile. With a wave, Yagyu, Hinata, and Shino vanished in a flash. Throughout the entire encounter, Sakura didn't bother to thank Yagyu because their friendship had deepened to the point where words weren't needed. Team 8 sprinted through the forest hopping from tree to tree. Shino looked over at Yagyu and asked, "Did you find Team 10? "Yes, I did. They're fine and have already collected both scrolls," Yagyu replied with a grin. "Let's head straight to the central tower." "All right." And so, Team 8 increased their pace, reaching the central tower in the Forest of Death within just a few minutes. In less than 24 hours, they had passed the second exam. Since there were still over 100 hours left until the exam officially ended, Team 8 was assigned to rest in the dormitories of the central tower while they waited for the other teams to finish. They had time to rest, and the Leaf Village even provided food. If the third exam were to start immediately after the second, the teams who arrived early would have a huge advantage. By giving them time to rest, everyone would have a fair shot in the next stage. Time passed quickly, and soon it was 4 days later. During this time, Yagyu encountered Gaara several times in the cafeteria. Gaara's gaze was filled with murderous intent every time he looked at Yagyu. Underneath Gaara's sand armor, his expression was likely twisted with excitement and savagery. Yagyu, however, just smiled it off. But his calm demeanor and fearless attitude toward Gaara didn't go unnoticed by Temari and Kankuro, who began to feel uneasy. After the first exam, they had done some research on Yagyu, curious about how he had managed to keep Gaara under control. They discovered that Yagyu was the top student of this year's class, and that he had been in the same team as Uchiha Sasuke, the last of the Uchiha clan, as well as the heirs of other prominent ninja clans. This led them to realize that this genius civilian was far more formidable than he seemed on the surface. They understood that when the time came, Yagyu might be one of their greatest enemies. On July 7, Konoha year 60, at 2:30 p.m., Yagyu and his team were notified that the second exam was about to end. When they arrived in the central tower's first floor hall, it was already packed with other contestants. Unlike the clean and unscathed Team 8, and Gaara's trio, the other participants were covered in bandages, had torn clothing, or were covered in dust, clear signs that they had not had an easy time during the last 5 days. Yagyu and his team's arrival instantly attracted attention. Everyone's eyes were filled with caution as they looked at them. Some relaxed when they saw Hinata's Byakugan, understanding that her ability to see long distances and through objects made it easier for their team to collect both scrolls and reach the tower faster than the others. Yagyu, Hinata, over here, over here. Ino's voice called out from the crowd. Yagyu spotted her waving, her new hairstyle featuring blonde twin ponytails. Beside her stood a slightly battered Sakura, her clothes dust-covered. With a smile, Yagyu made his way over to them. As soon as he reached Ino, she pouted playfully, "Yagyu, you went to help Sakura, but why didn't you come find me?" "Who said I didn't?" Yagyu gently adjusted Ino's ponytails and smiled. "I checked on both of you. I only showed up to help Sakura because she was in danger. Once I saw you had your scroll, I felt reassured and left. Hee. I was looking for you too. It wasn't until I ran into Team 7 2 days ago that I found out Sakura had been in trouble. Sakura was amazing, by the way. The look she gave that sound ninja was so cool. Too bad I didn't get a picture of it." "Stop it. It's embarrassing. Yagyu, where do you even keep that camera of yours? Got any pictures developed yet? Let me see. Take a guess." As Yagyu and his friends continued to chat, the time reached 3 p.m. Suddenly, a large group of figures appeared on the second-floor balcony, including the proctor and examiners of the second test, as well as the Jonin instructors and other unfamiliar Jonin. At the forefront stood none other than the third Hokage himself. The Jonin instructors didn't come down to greet their students. Instead, they stood on the sides of the balcony, giving their students thumbs up or nodding in approval. Among them was Kurane, raising her thumb with pride. Seeing Yagyu, Hinata, and Shino standing there clean and unscathed, in stark contrast to the other contestants, Kurane knew right away that they must have been the first to pass the exam. Among the Jonin instructors, only Kakashi Hatake descended, checking Sasuke's curse mark and offering to seal it immediately. However, Sasuke refused, not wanting to risk being disqualified for missing part of the upcoming exams. Kakashi didn't push further and returned to the balcony, turning his attention to the third Hokage. The third Hokage then gave a speech, explaining the significance of the Chunin exams and especially the third exam. He emphasized that the Chunin exams were an important demonstration of the power and prowess of each village in peacetime. This was especially true for the third exam, which would be held in Konoha's largest stadium. There would not only be a massive audience but also wealthy merchants and nobles attending. Powerful villages and shinobi would gain the attention of these important figures, and in the future, they might be the ones who receive high-ranking mission requests. However, only the elite would be able to participate in the third exam. Even though many had passed the second exam, it was still a team-based event. The next stage would be a preliminary elimination round, pitting individuals against each other to have the number of remaining contestants and determine the elite. Standing in the back of the group, Yagyu counted the remaining participants. Including himself, there were 24 who had passed the second exam. Thanks for watching.